opening phone and text lines for conversation about the state of the Me Too era with Donald Trump headed back to the White House. What does Trump's as yet unapproved cabinet signal about acceptance of abusers in our day-to-day? And what message does that send to young people out there? Call or text.
I'm Andrea Cabral in for Jim Browdy. Then it's GBH's Jared Bowen with his weekly rundown of arts and culture news, from the Broadway to Hollywood adaptation of Wicked to artifacts from the Titanic.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. A spokesman for the Trump transition team says the incoming administration is using an accelerated schedule to get key cabinet nominees confirmed quickly. Several are meeting lawmakers on Capitol Hill this week. NPR has learned that Vice President-elect J.D. Vance will be on Capitol Hill this week to arrange meetings between lawmakers and Attorney General nominee Matt Gaetz and Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth. Both have drawn intense criticism for their lack of experience and for allegations of sexual misconduct. They have denied the allegations. Trump has nominated his former Small Business Administration leader to be the next Secretary of Education. Linda McMahon is also known as a pro-wrestling business magnate. Trump has vowed to close the Education Department, but NPR's Corey Turner reports if McMahon is confirmed, it's not clear how she'll do that.
In Trump's statement announcing McMahon's nomination, he said he expects her to be a champion for school choice, and it would be hard for her to do that without an education department.
NPR's Corey Turner reporting. A California ballot measure that would have increased the state's minimum wage has been narrowly defeated, according to a call by the Associated Press. From member station KQED, Farida Jabala Romero has more.
Proposition 32 would have given what proponents say is as many as 2 million Californians a raise to $18 an hour by 2026, up from $16 an hour. Joe Sandberg, who spearheaded the measure, said he and other supporters were disappointed but would keep fighting.
This is one bump in the longer-term journey to make California a place where everyone who works can afford life's basic needs.
Business groups opposing the measure argued it would lead to price increases and job cuts. For NPR News, I'm Farida Jabala Romero in Oakland, California.
A woman who drowned her 2 children in a South Carolina lake in 1994 and blamed their disappearance on a black man is asking to be freed from prison. NPR's Kristen Wright reports Susan Smith goes before a parole board for the first time today.
The case made international headlines. Susan Smith said she was carjacked by a black man with her 2 little boys in the back seat. She repeatedly pleaded for their safe return. Her false claims set off a nationwide search and stirred racial tension. After 9 days, Smith confessed to letting her car roll into a lake, drowning Alex and Michael. Her attorneys blamed her mental health and a history of sexual assault. Prosecutors argued she did it because of an affair with a man who didn't want children. Smith is serving life and is now eligible for parole. Her ex-husband, the children's father, has said she should stay behind bars, and the state reportedly got hundreds of letters opposing her release. Smith has had various disciplinary problems in prison. Kristen Wright, NPR News.
You're listening to NPR.
Good morning. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey doubling down on the state's commitment to offshore wind. That's amid concerns President-elect Donald Trump could put the kibosh on plans to build more turbines off the coast of New England. 3 offshore wind farms are already operational or in the works in the region. Speaking with unionized electric workers yesterday, Healey said stopping the projects would make no sense.
Why would you want to kill tens of thousands of jobs? Why would you want to kill an opportunity for American energy independence?
The wind farms are in federal waters, so the Trump administration could interfere with processing key permits for the projects. Trump has said offshore wind could increase electricity costs. Well, no sooner did we learn that 300 primary care doctors at Mass General Brigham set the wheels in motion to form a union. Now we're seeing yet another sign of discontent at the largest hospital in the Commonwealth. Boston Globe reports that 10 primary care doctors from a single Brigham and Women's Hospital practice in Chestnut Hill have announced their resignations to join a new practice in Wellesley that's affiliated with rival Beth Israel Lahey Health. And in the sports, we've got Bruins off until tomorrow, Celtics off until Friday. Pats are in Miami on Sunday. In the forecast, increasing clouds today, high 55, cloudy upper 40s overnight. Much needed rain arrives tomorrow, high in the low 50s. Then that rain could continue into Friday and Saturday. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Capital One, offering their premium travel card, Venture X. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. Details at CapitalOne.com. And listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
Welcome to Boston Public Radio, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Jim has the day off, but sitting in for Jim is former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety, Andrea Cabral. Hello, Andrea.
Hello, Marjorie.
So we start the show with @MeToo. Remember that? The social awareness campaign against sexual violence toward women that gained popularity back in 2017 when women started widely sharing their personal experiences of sexual assault by men, showcasing just how big of an issue it was and continues to be in our society at protests around the country. Women and their allies marched with signs like, quote, "Not a fad, a revolution," unquote, or "Our body, our choice." But in 2024, committing sexual violence seems it's less a barrier to political power than a prerequisite for political power. Multiple men picked by the President-elect Trump, and Trump, of course, himself as a convicted, at least adjudicated, I should say, in a civil court, a sexual abuser, that people he's chosen to join his cabinet have sexual misdeeds or alleged crimes prominently displayed on their resumes. So what does this say about the success of the Me Too movement that brought down a lot of people who had bad resumes in this regard? Matt Lauer, Roger Ailes, Les Moonves from NBC, a lot of famous people. What does it say about this movement in 2024 and 2025? How do we coexist in a society where we hold our children or our coworkers or our friends to a higher standard than the political class that claims to represent us and basically run the country? What do we tell young people around us? We are a far cry from George Washington, as Andrea pointed out this morning. George Washington said he couldn't tell a lie, and Donald Trump says he cannot tell the truth, as you put it in our morning meeting. Did I get that about right?
You got that right.
Okay,
that's exactly right.
So our number is 877-301-8970. You can call us or text us with your interpretation of what all these alleged, and in some cases no longer alleged, adjudicated sexual predators in the highest reaches of our government says about where we are in 2024. Is the Me Too movement all done? What do you think, Andrea?
Well, I think that just like the vote in the general election, it's a referendum on the country itself. These things were not or should not have been unknown to the voter. I find it really hard to believe that any voter simply didn't know anything about Trump's history. Maybe Matt Gaetz a little bit less. Maybe you do have to be paying attention to some degree to know what's going on with Matt Gaetz, but you look at these appointments and you see the things that all of these appointees have in common: general lack of knowledge about the secretariat they're about to head, general incompetence in the area of government or a disdain or hostility to government, and sexual predation. Those are the things that these nominees, most of these nominees, have in common. And it's unbelievable. I want to commend to people for their own personal reading a piece in Salon.com by someone named Lucien K. Truscott IV, who makes the point that with these nominees, you know, with Trump as president and Gaetz as a nominee and Pete Hegseth as a nominee, who's also been fairly credibly accused of rape, and someone he paid off when he was at Fox News to keep quiet, makes the point that men, and this is true in my experience as a prosecutor of sexual assault and domestic violence cases, that men who sexually assault and rape or prey on women and underage girls are small and weak men. Why we would ever elevate them to the highest positions of power in this country, expect them to run the country is insane. But also they're people who will always abuse power to whatever level they're given power. And Truscott makes the point that voters saying that this stuff doesn't matter to them fundamentally changes our notion of who should run the country, who should be given power to run the country. And you know what? You get the government you deserve. Unfortunately, you may drag the rest of us along with you, but you get the government you deserve when you turn a blind eye to this stuff.
Our number is 877-301-8970. You can call us or text us. One of the most shocking things of this whole thing is that the Republican Senate, they're debating whether or not that they are going to accept Matt Gaetz as the guy that's running the Department of Justice. And you saw the lawyer or you read about the lawyer of these two women that were among the people that the Ethics Committee spoke with. And we still haven't seen this Ethics Committee report on Gaetz has reportedly been hacked, but we haven't seen all the details. And he's talking about Gaetz goes to these sex parties arranged by a friend of his who's doing 11 years in prison at the moment for that and other things. Goes to these sex parties where he grinds up these ED drugs, erectile dysfunction drugs, I think you call them, grinds them up and takes an energy drink so he can have sex all night long. And one of the women saw him having sex by the pool. I believe it was on a pool table, but maybe it was just by the pool with a 17-year-old girl. To his credit, Gaetz stopped when he realized she was 17 and decided to wait till she was 18. But he's talking about the money that he paid to these women and other women for sex. I think that, you're a foreign prosecutor, paying for sex, I believe, is illegal in most parts of the United States of America.
It is.
Yeah.
So it is.
So there's problem number one, and the underage women. So they're debating this, which really says something. It's kind of bizarre. But anyway, that's where we are in 2024. 877-301-8970. And one other thing, I think this is really hard to take if you are a survivor of some kind of sexual assault, a victim of some kind of sexual assault, to think that half the country, and it isn't the big, huge mandate we talked about before, but it is half the country. He's not at 50%, but 49.9% of Americans, or whatever it is, and she got 48.2 or whatever it was. 49% think that that's okay. It didn't bother them.
Well, and the other part that's very troubling is the underlying sort of misogyny or apathy around issues of misogyny that I don't know that we necessarily talk enough about, because J.D. Vance, who believes that women should stay in violent and abusive relationships, is up on the Hill with Matt Gaetz today, going door to door with the senators, trying to drum up support to get Gaetz confirmed, or through a recess appointment where they just completely, obviate the need for the Senate to do its advice and consent thing.
And let's not forget Elon Musk. There's been a lot of talk about how he runs an animal house environment there in his various businesses, and there have been lawsuits against him. One of them accuses Musk of treating women as sexual objects to be evaluated by their bra size and bombarding the workplace with lewd sexual banter. Any case, 877-301-8970 is the number. What do you think about this? Judy in Rhode Island thinks we need to pass the ERA. That might make a difference.
Isn't it amazing that after all these years, that's still an issue and a question, and you see the results of that with what we're talking about today.
And do people always bring up other presidents like Bill Clinton, who had a long and sordid history, or even the things about Biden touching people's hair and getting too close to them and stuff like that. We didn't know those things when we elected them. That's the big difference.
Right.
Sean on the road. What do you think, Sean?
Hi, Sean.
Hey, how are you? I'm a longtime lover of WGBH. Went to BU and just flew up from Florida on business. And I was listening to your radio commentary, and I thought I would call in.
Sure.
I think that we live in a different world from the moral high standards that may be set on politicians today. We live in a very polygamous type of society where sexual freedom is very much granted across the board to all people. And I think what we're seeing in our politicians is frankly just a reflection of the broader culture. And so I don't see where holding politicians to these very high standards is of real any value to us. It's really, as a Republican, it's really about who can do what the achievements can occur. And I think that the unfortunate thing is that, I was a never Trumper, and I had to work through this thinking myself to come to a point where I could endorse and vote for Trump. And I really just came to the point where we can no longer hold our politicians to these very strong sexual moral
Well,
standards.
hold on for a second, Sean. Sexual freedom is not sexual assault. You know, if everybody's free to you do whatever you want sexually. The issue here is raping people, having sex with underage women. Donald Trump is on the double digits for the women that have accused him of attacking them, and he's been adjudicated liable for raping a woman. This is sexual violence. Isn't there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a lot of false accusations, and I think
Which
that's
ones?
unfortunate.
Which ones?
I think that Trump has been falsely accused. I think that Gates has not been proven that he had. And I think that the new military
Hegseth.
Pete Hegseth.
Yeah.
That appears to be a mutual.
No, that was his defense.
No,
His defense was that it was mutual.
Yeah,
What actually happened, according to witnesses, is that he was incredibly drunk at a Republican event. He did have a bunch of women who were there to hear him speak. He then asked a woman to escort him back to his room because he was so drunk. Apparently, once inside, attacked her and raped her, and then paid her off when he was a Fox News host.
And
because he was afraid he was going to lose his job.
And she went to the cops, and she was covered with bruises, and she did a rape test kit, and
all of that.
He paid her off, is what happened, Sean. But anyway, thank you for the call. 877-301-8970. We can't forget that the president himself, in his most famous tape recording, admitted that he runs around grabbing women by the crotch, essentially, and that they let him do it because he's. But what always amazes me, yeah, but just one thing, when people like Sean say these are unproven, you know, if Andrea Cabral was accused of robbing a dozen 7-Elevens, and she showed up in the same outfit with the same modus operandi, and all these people said she robbed me, we wouldn't hear people saying, oh, well, you know, that everybody's making this up at the 7-Eleven. It's only in these sex cases that we hear it, right?
Well,
because he's got 24 women or 27 women.
It's more than that. It's actually more than that. He's been credibly accused throughout, many, many years of his life. But understand that part of this, you know, nothing's been proven, and I think they're false allegations. You asked Sean twice which people are making false allegations. He can't answer you because he doesn't have an answer to it. And so part of this is people justifying in their own minds why they have endorsed and or voted for Trump. And part of the way you do that is by saying that none of the myriad of allegations against him have any merit, despite the fact that you have no proof that that's true.
Eileen Hudson, what do you think?
Well, what I think is that the press and the media normalize this by using the term sex with women or sex with underage women. The technical term, the legal term for what is happening is statutory rape.
Absolutely
right.
right.
That's a good point. Good point, Eileen.
They do not want to use that term because it sounds too harsh, but that's how you normalize sexual violence against underage women.
That's exactly right. And the other part of that is that it intimates that the women either made themselves look older than they actually were, like the underage part was a mistake, which in Gates's case, the allegation is that he absolutely knew. But it also makes it seem as though they somehow lured men into this, and that has been a running trope since the beginning of time, that women, a woman or a girl was asking for it.
Oh, yeah.
But Eileen's absolutely right.
Well, you were a prosecutor. I'm sure you had
all the time.
I mean,
all the time.
The consent is what the alleged rapist usually says. Oh, it's consensual,
right?
Or he didn't do it. They always deny it.
Pedophiles routinely accuse little girls of enticing them in some way, shape, or form to justify their behavior.
That's right. People may have read Lolita back in college, and that was basically what that book was about, too. 877-301-8970 is the number. Anonymous texter says, the only thing I've been able to tell my grandkids is that millions of people in this country are incredibly selfish to have made this choice, but we are not. Our family values are unchanged. They will be protected by us, and we will continue to navigate our lives with empathy, kindness, and a heightened awareness of predators and a fierceness to be ready to defend our values. That's a good grandmother or grandfather that sent that. Barb in Somerville, what do you think, Barb?
Hi, Barb.
Hi. So nice to hear two ladies. I kind of have more of a statement than I have a question. I'm just laughing my tush off at the idea of 2 years in the Senate, J.D. Vance is who they're bringing out to drum up support for Matt Gaetz. Is that sending a message or what? Was Ivanka not available?
Yeah, I guess you go to war with the army you have, not the army you wish you had.
Yeah, that's a great one. Anything else you'd like to add there, Barb?
Yes, my other point is there is a scale we have. Again, I'm sorry, I'm not asking questions. My partner and I, we have a scale of NDAs most likely, requested by the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. And we think Elon Musk is number one. And we think Vivek is probably, Elon Musk is 10 and Vivek is probably 1. So it's very sad that we're ranking the likely sexual assault NDAs that they've all had to. So we're ranking them, and it's a close contest, but we think Elon's at the top.
Thank you for your call, Barb. Nan from Concord says, the Trump supporters twist themselves into knots to rationalize their vote. The bottom line is character doesn't matter. A sad commentary on where we are. And that is my question for Sean. At the point at which you relinquish the idea that you have a right to expect some measure of character from your elected leaders, do you really understand what it is you're losing when you give that up? And I don't think people do. I think they're about to find out. We forgot to mention RFK before we go to the break here. He, of course, is the guy that's running Health and Human Services, going to be in charge. Your favorite guy.
My favorite guy, that's right. He was accused of groping a babysitter. He said he didn't remember the incident. How he did, however, apologize to her, saying, I'm not a church boy. I had a very rambunctious youth, when he was asked about this later in a podcast. And he's married now to the actor Cheryl Hines. He was also accused just this fall of having a year-long personal relationship with a reporter.
I think it was basically proven. She was ultimately fired from her job.
Yeah,
I think they admitted it.
And she sent him a lot of pictures of her, and that was consensual. That certainly isn't sexual assault. That was consensual, but it's just the babysitter would be another matter entirely. So anyway.
We're going to take a break. Time for a break. More of your calls and your texts are next. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the BPL and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
The Prime Minister of Albania made a deal to detain some migrants heading for Italy. Criticism ranges from human rights violations to local politics.
He makes friends with other political leaders, and political leaders in Europe turn the blind eye on his corruption. That's very simple.
We visit the Albanian town that's hosting a migrant detention facility next time on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And Comcast, offering Xfinity Internet, designed to provide a connection for home networks so everyone can be online at once, even during peak hours. More information at xfinity.com. And the Office of the Massachusetts State Treasurer. The Unclaimed Property Division is holding unclaimed funds from medical bills, uncashed paychecks, savings accounts, and more. To see if you have unclaimed money, you can visit findmassmoney.gov.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. I am with former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety today, Andrea Cabral. She's in for Jim. Our text prompt today at 877-301-8970. Amazon is requiring workers to come back to the office 5 days a week. Is your company moving in that direction too, or you're worried they will? Give us a text. We want to hear your thoughts about the return to work, how you're navigating it, how you're avoiding going in every day, or maybe you love the office, who knows, or maybe you have no choice. You can text us at 877-301-8970. But right now, we're talking about the Me Too movement. A lot of us are all revved up about the Me Too movement back in 2024, when thousands of women talked about their difficulties with sexual harassment in the office, sexual assault, told their own stories by the thousands and thousands. Meanwhile, the majority of the country has voted for a convicted sexual abuser to the most powerful office, and the Republicans in the Senate don't seem particularly concerned about Matt Gaetz, the guy that wants to be the head of the Justice Department, having sex with a 17-year-old girl and paying other women for sex. 877-301-8970. Greg from someplace outside Boston. Thanks for calling.
Hi, Greg.
Hi, how you doing? First-time caller, long-time listener. I can't believe that guy who called in before trying to normalize pretty much rape. Like, it's a violent, controlling thing that people do to another person. It should never be normalized. It should never be okay. It just blows my mind that we have people who think of that direction.
Thank you for that, Greg.
My main thing I wanted to say was what's really happening, especially with the removal of sex education in schools and these programs, is young individuals, teenagers at a young age aren't learning what they need to learn. Like, what is consent? What do you do if something happens to you, whether it's male or female? And by continuing to dismantle the education system and not having this taught in school or not having it brought up in a household, now you have a bunch of kids who don't know what consent is, and they don't know how to protect themselves, so they don't know what to do if something happens to them. And it just makes the system worse. It just blows my mind. And I'm 43, so I grew up before cell phones, and I grew up in the woods playing with friends and everything else, and I still have friends who weren't able to protect themselves, and it blows my mind. And then it snowballs into the abortion thing. It's all about controlling women and making them. It just blows my mind.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg.
Wrap my head around it.
Thanks, Greg. That was a great call. Speaking of schools, it reminds me of the piece from The Guardian that talked about the teenager who went to school, a young girl, after the election, and a lot of the other girls in her social circle were pretty upset about the election. Meanwhile, she talked about the boys in her class giving each other high fives and seemed to be quite excited about the mask. There was a big appeal, the manosphere, they called it. A lot of the podcasts that talk about, how the guys got to go to the gym 24 hours a day and bulk up and take all these special drugs and everything else. She's talking about this sort of macho ethos that seeped into her high school, and she found it very disturbing.
Well, people should be mindful of the fact that none of this ever happens in a vacuum, and that, the signals that are sent, what's accepted, what's not accepted, finds its way into your community, it finds its way into your school, it finds its way into your social circles. And, when you have children, certainly if you have daughters, you have to start to worry about the impact of this on that. Not that in one fell swoop, it's all of our entire system of redress is going to be swept away, but it becomes about the atmosphere that your children learn in and work in and play in, that you work in. And it's really very concerning. My question this morning was, what do people tell their kids about, your kid gets into trouble and gets into real trouble, and you tell them that they have to mind their behavior because it can affect them later on in life, and your kid turns to you and says, it doesn't mean I can't be president, and that would be absolutely true.
That's right. A texter says, J.D. Vance has 3 daughters. I'd like to ask him if he'd want his daughters to date Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, I don't think
that's a good one.
I don't think anybody.
And
would.
I always remember of Al Franken, who was a senator for a long time, Saturday Night Live star. He had to resign during the Me Too movement, and some people think that he shouldn't have had to resign. But in any case, for putting his hands above, not on top of a woman's breast in an airplane
right.
when she was sleeping, and he allegedly did other kind of things in other photographs. But in any case, he was at the low end of the abuse scale compared to other people like a Matt Lauer or a Roger Ailes that used to run Fox News. Daniel from Boston, thank you for calling.
Hi, Daniel. Is he still there?
Hi. Yeah, I'm still here. My point, you kind of stole my point there with Al Franken.
Oh, sorry.
My point is that the Me Too movement is a victim of its own excesses, and that people have become fatigued by this stream of allegations. Even if you take that full credibility at face value, really amount to nothing. And Al Franken is one example. I would say, like the writer Uno Diaz is another example. These are allegations in which minor instances of rudeness or lame pickup attempts or lame compliments are described as sexual assault. And this has degraded the whole credibility of what Me Too is. Nobody really gets very exercised about any allegation, even aside from the instances of false allegations. It's just every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and now there is a reaction against.
But Daniel, if every action has an opposite and equal reaction, then what and where is the reaction to credible allegations of sexual assault, proven allegations of sexual assault? I mean, it is very common for people to take a bad situation where there may be instances of people making allegations that somehow people consider still to be minor, and saying, it's because you keep, you make an allegation every single time, and that sort of justifies not paying attention to the very serious, and in many cases, adjudicated cases that we have in front of us. I mean, that's the bottom line here, is that you can sort of say, you can choose to ignore it based on what you perceive to be less than credible allegations or allegations of minor things, or you can concentrate on the serious allegations and the level of power that person who's been credibly accused has attained and do something about that. So I wouldn't call Me Too a victim of its own success. There are going to be differences in perception. Me Too was necessary, and it's still necessary. There's actually an article out that says sexual assault, nothing about sexual assault or sexual violence has decreased since the Me Too movement, and that means that predation is still going strong.
I just want to mention a little bit of breaking news. You may have been following the case of Laken Riley. She was the young woman that was murdered while she was jogging. Jose Ibarra has been found guilty on all counts of her murder. They had pretty overwhelming evidence against this guy, and he was just found guilty. 877-301-8970. A different Sean in the car. Hi, Sean in the car.
Hi, how are you guys?
Hi,
Good,
Sean.
thanks.
Hey, I felt like I needed to call to bring some esteem and some creditation to all Seans in the cars based on that first caller that you had.
Speaking for all Seans.
Okay.
I can't speak for him, but I imagine there's other Seans in the car that are like, what the heck was that? Anyway, 2 quick points. One, this was definitely a referendum on the Me Too movement. I mean, it couldn't be more obvious. It's unexplainable what happened. And I just wanted to mention is I listen to the Bulwark podcast.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not listening to you guys. Great podcast. And I think they had Bill Crystal or somebody reported earlier this week that Pete Hegseth actually wrote a column, whether it was in college or post-college, stating that you needed to have 2 things for rape. One is consistent, and 2 is direct.
Sean, we have a lousy connection, and I'm missing every other word. If you could go on hold for a second, try to move to a better place or something, I'm missing. I would love to hear what you have to say about Hegseth from the Bulwark, but I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Let's go to Amy from Worcester in the meantime.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, long-time listener, first-time caller, but I am so concerned about what this is going to mean for people who experience assault and abuse to feel safe or even have any kind of effective, I don't know, how can we expect people to stand up and say, this is happening to me, I want it to stop, but there's going to be absolutely no repercussions except on me and my life.
Amy, thank you. That was another tough connection, but I get the very important point you're making. I think, as you know, as a former prosecutor,
right,
it's very difficult for women to come forward in a sexual assault case, and it's even harder to win one.
Well, what you can say is that, these are still by and large state prosecutions. You still have a local police department. You still have, these aren't federal cases. So you still make the best use you can of the systems that are available to you at the state level. But it's a really good point. It's also a really good argument for allowing people to continue to work from home, because then they won't get sexually harassed at work.
That's right.
Thank you very much for all of your calls and texts. Coming up after a quick break, GBH Executive Arts Editor Jared Bowen is here to talk about the movie Wicked, which is out, heavily anticipated and out in theaters next week. Or this week, actually, I'm sorry. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the BPL and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
At least 20 states have Republican proposals aimed at limiting or
what the obstructionists are claiming it is.
You get a lot of socialism.
I'm Kirk Carapezza. We investigate the DEI backlash and how it's affecting students in our podcast, College Uncovered. Get it today, wherever you listen.
Support for GBH comes from you. And Tools of the Mind, offering a bite of tools. Professional development workshops empowering pre-K and kindergarten teachers with actionable strategies to propel children's self-regulation development. More at toolsofthemind.org. And the University of Massachusetts Amherst, ranked the #1 public university in New England by U.S. News & World Report. You can learn more about research, innovation, and economic impact for the Commonwealth at umass.edu.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. We are at the library today, the Boston Public Library. We are also streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. And Andrew Cabral is in for Jim Browdy. Our text prompt today, 877-301-8970. Amazon is requiring workers to come back to the office 5 days a week. Is your company moving in that direction? Give us a text. We want to hear your thoughts about returning to work, how you're managing it, if you're trying to avoid it. Maybe you don't want to go in every day. Maybe you'd like to go in 2 days or 1 day or no days, or maybe you love the office. Text us 877-301-8970. But right now we are joined live at the library desk by GBH Executive Arts Editor Jared Bowen, host of The Culture Show, which airs daily right after we end at 2 o'clock on 89.7 GBH. Hey, Jared.
Hello,
Good
Jared.
morning. Great to be with you both.
Great to see you, too.
So, Jared, to say that Wicked is hotly anticipated might be the understatement of the show. I want to play a clip from Wicked. This is Elphaba, who's played by Cynthia Erivo, who is just one of the most remarkably talented singer, actresses that's come down the pike in a long time. She's talking to Madame Morrible, who's played by the wonderful Michelle Yeoh, about the injustices in the world, and her powers become apparent as she speaks and objects and objects in the room start breaking.
I just wish I could. What? You wish what? I wish there was something I could do, because no one. No one? Do what? No one should be scorned or laughed at or looked down upon or told to stop jabbering and keep working. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable.
So why
Wow.
do people
Don't make her mad.
love this? Loved it on Broadway. What people are going nuts.
This is, as you say, it's one of the most hugely anticipated films of the year, in part, I think, because it was delayed about a year. The actors' strike and the writers' strike pushed this all back, and then they made the decision that they would split this actually into 2 parts. So when it opens tomorrow in select theaters before opening widely this weekend, you're only seeing the first half of the musical, which is kind of funny because the film is about 2 hours and 45 minutes long, which I think is about longer than the actual musical. That said, it's really, really fantastic. I think that the fans are going to be really, really, really happy. So Cynthia Erivo plays Elphaba, Ariana Grande plays Glinda or Galinda. And so this is the story that Gregory Maguire, a Massachusetts resident, by the way, devised many, many years ago, back in 1995, where he was looking at this notion of evil and where we choose to demonize people. And so looking at this story of the Wicked Witch of the West, is she evil, or have we just been told she's evil? So this is something that he explored, and then it became the musical with music by Stephen Schwartz, and then just exploded, one of the longest running musicals of all time on Broadway. And they have a really starry cast, including those two, Michelle Yeoh, as we just heard, Jonathan Bailey as the prince, Ethan Slater, who is another big Broadway star, as one of the Munchkins. It's a really, really fun musical. I will say it's a little bit bloated, however, it's terrific, especially, I will say, in addition to how fabulous Cynthia Erivo is, and she's a musical theater star, Ariana Grande has these great comedic chops, and she captures the essence of Galinda, much the same way Kristen Chenoweth did as the originator of the role on Broadway, with wonderful comedic timing. So it's just really, really enjoyable.
So this has brought up a little side controversy about people singing along to all the songs at the theater. I mean,
Yeah, well, I guess I'm realizing you go at your own peril because it's so anticipated, because people know the music, because so many people have seen the musical and then listened to the cast album at home. There are a lot of people making plans to go to the theater and sing along. Well, you can be sort of annoyed if you're going to experience the musical and you have everybody in the audience singing along with you. So a lot of people, including I think some of the cast members, have said, please don't. Just please go and enjoy it, and then maybe in the privacy of your home later on when you're able to view it at home, sing. But I think it speaks to how excited people are. Also, this is reminiscent of Barbie and Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
it absolutely is.
Gladiator 2 also opens on Friday, and so they're calling it either Glicked or Wicked Glad or Wikiator. I kind of am preferring Glicked. I think that's...
Yeah, Glicked is best.
Yeah,
I agree.
We have a clip from Gladiator 2, the trailer 2. It's a little bloody, Gladiator 2, from what I've seen. But anyway, here it is.
I remember that day. I never forgot it. That a slave could take revenge against an emperor.
Where were you born?
I don't know. I never knew a mother nor a father.
You will be my instrument.
Who are you?
Did you hear that crowd? The greatest temple Rome ever built. The Colosseum. Because this is what they believe in. Power.
So I haven't seen this one, but I have to say I'm really eager to. And now I can't have the Glicked experience since I saw Wicked already at a press screening. But I'm pretty eager to see this. It's Ridley Scott directing.
Yeah.
Paul Mescal.
Did you see the first one? Did you Yeah.
And so
that was Paul
great.
Mescal and Denzel Washington, actually, that you just heard in the clip. I think it has. This will be like another. I think it'll be like another sort of Barbenheimer. But I'm kind of hoping that people go and see Gladiator now with an eye toward history, right? Because he talks about this greatest temple Rome ever built. That was about bread and circuses. If you give people bread and circuses, they will allow you to do any atrocious thing you want to do. And he's right about that.
Well, it's interesting what Gregory Maguire did with Wicked, too, because there's a whole subplot about part of the reason Elphaba is cast off is because she goes to the university, Shiz University, and the animals who are professors are being silenced because the animals can speak. And there is a prevailing thought that the animals should have their voice, their scholarship, their ideology taken away from them and silenced forever. And she's fighting back against this. And there's I don't want to give too much away from the musical. I think so many people have seen it, but the wizard doesn't come off so well in this. So you have a regime that wants the silencing, and you see what happens when somebody pushes back. So there are layers to this, too, which I think are pretty resonant to today.
And once again, we look to art to kind of send those indirect messages.
That's right. Okay, so let's move on to this streaming on Hulu, FX's Say Nothing, people may remember this was the great, and you had a great interview with him, the author, yesterday, Patrick, what's the middle name?
Patrick Radden Keefe.
Radden Keefe, who wrote Say Nothing, and he also wrote Empire of Pain, which is a great piece about the opioid crisis. But tell us about Say Nothing. We have a little clip of that. I guess we can play the clip first. This takes place in Ireland. It's during the Troubles with a woman that was murdered, mother of 10, and on the other side, a young revolutionary woman that was raised to be part of the IRA. Here's the clip.
We've no guns, no ammo. What's an armed robbery if you're not even armed?
Think that's just called a robbery, Jimmy? And how can I help you today, sister?
Have you got a gun there? No. We can see your guns sticking the table now. Is that a spud gun?
It's not the size of the gun that matters, you know, it's how you use it. Not my experience.
So what'd you think?
This is really, really gripping. I, like so many people, loved this book, which reads like a novel because it is so suspenseful. You take Keefe, who is looking at the Troubles, which is this dense history in Northern Ireland of the sectarian differences between the Protestants and the Catholics, the Loyalists and the Revolutionaries, but he distills it into this drama. And he opens it with the abduction of a woman in these flats in Belfast, mother of 10, who just completely disappears. And then he periodically revisits her abduction throughout, as we're also moving in really into the interior lives of the people involved in the IRA and why they waged this campaign from the streets of Belfast all the way to the streets of London, as we saw in some of the bombings. So when I saw that this was being made into a series, I had some reservations because I loved the book so much and it's such weighty, important subject matter. However, I will say they have completely nailed the tone of this book, of these characters. They were very careful with the casting. They were very careful with how they tell it. This is something we talked about with Patrick Radden Keefe yesterday, is that there is also a bit of humor here, but it's a dark humor because, of course, humor always has a place even in the worst of times because that's one of the mechanisms to move through this. So I think even at that layer, they capture it. So it's a really, really compelling story.
I'm actually very much looking forward to watching it. I was telling Marjorie that I had hosted an Eisenhower fellow named Roisin Brown, lovely woman, but she's with the police service in Northern Ireland, and she's an inspector. And I thought of the Troubles as having sort of a place in history, and definitely there's always a before and an after, and history resonates. She's part of the reason she was doing her fellowship here and looking at how we deal with community policing is she's still trying to build the trust back and trying to get people at a place of understanding and conciliation, and it's like a brick wall. And then this comes out, this show comes out, and I was like, I've got to watch it because it's very much present still in Ireland.
Well, and people can go back and listen to the Culture Show interview we did with Patrick Radden Keefe on our podcast because I asked him about this, and there is a reason that it's still so prevalent even among the successive generations, and that's because unlike South Africa and apartheid, you didn't have a reconciliation project.
Yeah, that was a great
that happened
point.
afterwards.
That's a good
So it
point.
hasn't brought people together, and it's called Say Nothing for a reason because so many people, well, first of all, they refused to talk about the crimes until they didn't stop talking about the crimes, which, by the way, happened right here in Boston at the Boston College Archives for the Belfast Oral History Project, where so many people who participated in the IRA activities gave their stories. So that's partly how he was able to build
Not
this.
expecting it was going to be released
Exactly.
so soon.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be released.
Yeah.
But there are just layers and layers and layers to this, and a lot of this is captured in the series too. They also, I think, this is such a relief. We don't see this often anymore. FX and Hulu, they've dropped all 9 episodes all at once, so you can binge it.
Yeah.
So can I ask you one more thing about this? Like, so he sort of says in the interview, they wanted to do this from the perspective of asking people, what would you do? Which is a really unique way to take people who were not involved in it at all, who live in other countries, and say, put yourself in that situation. Like, did he talk about that with you?
Well, I asked him about the fact that what really hits home when you see the series is that these are kids. Jerry Adams was practically a kid, even though he denies all involvement with the IRA, which they have this disclaimer that comes up at the end of every episode. But these are very young people, but they were raised in this atmosphere of protection, of fighting, of violence. It was literally on their streets. And so this is what they were born into in so many cases. When they had parents who were involved, and these are the lessons that the parents then passed along literally at the dinner table. And so you can have an understanding of why they would do what they would do when these are the circumstances that are your 24-hour life.
Right.
So I was transfixed by these stories about the artifact exhibit of the Titanic.
Marjorie loves this, by the way.
I don't know why. It's really macabre. I can't wait to go. Tell us what's there. I assume it's worth... It sounds incredible.
Well, this is one of those questions. I had the same experience as I was walking through. Why are we so fascinated by this? But we all are. I mean,
thousands dead.
Thousands dead.
Well, actually, it wasn't 1,000. It was
people
15,
go to Alcatraz.
1,500?
They go to the Tower of London. People go to places where people suffer and die.
There are just things, I think, that work their way into the culture and our DNA, our, in history, too, that just enchant us for better or for worse. And so this is the experience that you have in this new Titanic exhibition, which is really interesting because I learned that there's only one company, the company that found the Titanic back in the 1980s and has brought up materials from this. They are the only ones who are allowed to show the materials. Also, the only materials that are on view are things they collect from the debris field that litter around the ship now. They can't actually go into the ship. That violates maritime rules. So they have excavated thousands of objects since the 1980s, and we find a huge array of them on view right now. It's at the castle at Park Plaza.
Yeah, right up the street.
And this is on view through February of 2025. But what they also do that I think is very clever is they give you an element of staging. So you're walking down a hall that is perfectly reminiscent of what the first-class cabins would be. You get an interior view of those cabins. They have painstakingly recreated the big grand foyer that is very famous from the Titanic movie. They're even having dancing lessons in there. But then you also see the second and third class cabins. But of course, interspersed throughout are the objects from the ship, objects that people had, cigarette cases and the cigarettes. I mean, some of the things that survive still are just truly remarkable. An entire gentleman's outfit, his suit, postcards, including one from Boston about a Boston stone. So you really get a sense of how people were living and the things that they had with them and the things that they were eating and how they were eating on this ship before it went down.
Isn't it also about class, too? Because you have the very wealthy people, so there's that sort of the misfortune of the very wealthy, but you had all the people in steerage who died.
Yeah, and of course they didn't have immediate access to the lifeboats. By the way, they do a projection of the lifeboat on the floor so you can get a sense of it. They were huge, so it makes it even more of a travesty when you realize how few people were actually able to access those lifeboats before they were dumped into the water. And I will say one of the most chilling things for me is you see all of this china lined up perfectly, and it turns out that they were able to lift this china off the ocean floor, all of these plates, because the cabinet in which they were held likely just dissolved and everything was left as it was found.
That's incredible.
So it's like you're walking into a pantry aboard the Titanic to see how it was all laid up, ready to serve people their meals.
Now, we have an important question before we move on from this subject. Jim and I did several segments debating the question of the door on which Kate Winslet floated after the Titanic went down.
No.
And there was a big controversy about whether if Kate Winslet had just moved over a little bit, then Leonardo DiCaprio could have fit in the door as well, and he wouldn't have gone down with the ship. Now, did they get into this at all? I mean, this was a big question.
You know that didn't actually happen. That was like the movie.
Yes, it did, Andrea. Yes, it did. They fell in love with the Titanic. He was a poor Irishman trying to make his way, and she left her jerk of a fiancé for Leonardo. Of course, who wouldn't, really? You know what I mean?
So I saw something about a door recently, and I kept meaning to go back to it. I thought, what are people talking about? This is one of those situations
it's the door.
Where you're now making me realize, you're watching the film, and it never occurs to you. Why is she hogging the entire
They did the experiment.
Door
The
panel?
story was they did the experiment, and no, it would not have worked. They actually did the experiment
because it would have
of
sunk?
putting a similarly sized person and with Kate Winslet in, and it would have sunk, and they both would have died. I think that was the conclusion.
So that's one theory. Of
But
course,
she was not exactly known in the movie as being, a doctorate in physics. She would not have known that. So to Marjorie's point, she really just was being selfish.
Well, also, what's going to happen if you go back? You get saved, and then you have to, Dad, I had a one-night stand in a time where this really isn't allowed.
That's right. They did have a one-night stand. She gave her his last name when they found her. You're right. This was kind of a made-up thing in the movie, but it was the big question that I always go away with
have to
about
go back
the Titanic.
and watch this again.
She should have moved over, and now Leonardo's dead, and it's very sad.
And it's her fault.
Okay, we have some breaking news that Jared is pointing out to me. What is the breaking news, Jared?
Yeah, so we've we've known for a year now that Jill Medvedow, the director of the ICA, Boston's Contemporary Art Museum, is stepping down. Well, just sort of as we're on the air here, the ICA is announcing that it has a new director, and this is very significant because Jill Medvedow led that museum for 26 years. Of her own accord, she decided to step down. She thought it's been long enough. She announced about a year ago. So the new director is Nora Burnett Abrams. She comes from the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver. She'll start on May 1st. She is somebody who has a long curatorial history of showing contemporary artists, more than 40 exhibitions and a number of books, and she has been the director at that museum since 2019. She's been at the museum for 15 years, and then prior to that, the Met and MoMA. But this was, for me, really interesting to watch because we're seeing a change of leadership in the arts and culture landscape. New director at the Huntington, new president of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Matthew Teitelbaum at the Museum of Fine Arts is stepping down. He basically did the same thing as Jill, announced a year-long exit, so it gives them time to install somebody new. And so we have a new generation of leaders. She looks to be about in her mid-40s, who will come into institutions that are on solid footing in this town, and then where do they take them next?
Right.
I mean, Jill Medvedow built that museum from this tiny little firehouse or police station, I can always confused which it was, on Boylston Street into this major museum on the waterfront that has a permanent collection, recognized that women artists weren't being represented, so they have an outsized collection of permanent art, in their permanent collection of art by women, stuff any other museum would love to have now because they weren't recognizing the value of collecting this years ago as Jill and her team did. So again, this new director, Nora Burnett Abrams, comes in at a time where she gets to move the organization forward, and it'll be fascinating to watch how she does that. Especially, as I keep saying, we need to have accessibility and free admission and find ways to open up our museums.
Can I just say I'm very impressed with the fact that you are the person breaking this news. That, I mean, our own Jared Bowen, who is our arts and culture, the king of arts and culture, it's just very impressive that you're announcing this to us. But I wanted to ask you, what are you looking forward to? I mean, you're intimately familiar with all this. You know, it's a speculation at this point, but what are you looking forward to having happen?
Well, I certainly hope the DNA is carried, because if you look at the ICA, they have presented artists earlier in their career who are now rock stars, major art exhibitions. For instance, the ICA was the one to present the Venice Biennale of Simone Lee. So they were the one to show the world Simone Lee when she hadn't had a major exhibition before this. So I'd like to see that continue. But I also, as I talk about all the time on the Culture Show, want to see how we can figure out, if it's the most viable and appropriate, a path to free admission. So many museum directors have told me they would love to have free admission. That comes with a number assigned to it. They need whether it's $10 million or $20 million to build an endowment. Many museum directors have said, if you tap the right network, you have the right conversations, that can happen. Why should it happen? Because it brings everybody in the door.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about the cost associated with it, and then there are no expectations on you once you get inside the door. I would love to see with this new director how she feels about that. I did notice that she has $5 after 5 p.m. at her current museum.
Oh,
so,
that's great.
Yeah.
I remember Michelle Wu talking about how her mother used to take her to the museums in Chicago on the day it was free, and what a big deal that was to her as a young girl, learning an appreciation of great art. I mean, it is expensive if you got 2 or 3 kids to try to go to one of these museums on the weekend.
But it's life-changing, and it should be for everybody.
Exactly. That's my whole point. If you go in as a child, it stays with you for the rest of your life. And it's really difficult to lose that.
Well, Jared, congrats on your big scoop.
Right, well, thanks.
I'm as excited about all of it as you are. Thank you so much. I always look forward to seeing you.
And you.
We've been speaking with Jared Bowen, who is GBH's own executive arts editor. He's the host of The Culture Show. It airs daily right after VPR ends at 2 p.m. on 89.7. Thanks as always, Jared. Coming up after the noon.
To Boston Public Radio with Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. Just ahead, more smart conversation about what's going on in our community. That's right after an NPR news break here on GBH News 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you. And Blythewald. Every year, Blythewald Manor transforms into a dazzling display celebrating the magic of Christmas. Open Tuesday through Sunday, 11 to 3. More at blythewald.org. Sir David Attenborough is the most iconic voice of the natural world, but audiences rarely get to see the man behind the lens. Experience his incredible story. Don't miss Attenborough's life journey tonight at 8 on GBH2.
Trusted. Local. News. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you.
I'm Marjorie Egan. Head on hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio, live from the Boston Public Library. New York City bids adieu to broker's fees. There's been conversation about having Boston follow suit. It's the last major U.S. city clinging to the custom. We'll talk about that with Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Leung, and she'll preview her podcast conversation with legendary journalist and Asian American glass ceiling breaker Connie Chung.
I'm Andrea Cabral, in for Jim Browdy. Transgender Americans are under fire, facing bigotry, persecution, and scrutiny from both sides of the political aisle and a second Trump administration. Here to discuss and to mark Trans Day of Remembrance, trans rights advocate, attorney Alejandra Caraballo. And our text prompt of the day, more and more offices are mandating a return to work in person. Is yours? Are you going back, or have you found creative ways to work from home? And are these policies negotiable? Text us your thoughts next on Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the BPL.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. A Venezuelan man has been convicted of murdering Georgia nursing student Laken Riley in February. The verdict was announced a short time ago against Jose Ibarra. Federal officials say the 26-year-old entered the U.S. illegally in 2022 and was allowed to remain in the country while pursuing his immigration case. Ibarra's arrest fueled the national debate over immigration overhaul and the Trump campaign's message that President Biden is weak on immigration. Many voters cited immigration as one of the key reasons they voted for Trump instead of Vice President Harris. The House Ethics Committee is expected to meet today to discuss their investigation, of former Congressman Matthew Gaetz, who recently resigned after President-elect Trump nominated him for Attorney General. Gaetz is one of several picks drawing criticism. Trump has also said he will nominate Dr. Mehmet Oz to run the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. NPR's Selena Simmons-Duffin reports Oz is best known for his former daily talk show.
Dr. Mehmet Oz, a cardiothoracic surgeon, he built his fame and fortune by promoting alternative therapies like unproven diet products, cleanses, and detoxes. He first became famous as a guest on the Oprah Winfrey Show. That led to a radio show and to daytime TV's The Dr. Oz Show. That ended in 2022 when Oz ran as the Republican candidate for Senate in Pennsylvania. He narrowly lost to John Fetterman in that race. If he's confirmed by the Senate, he'll be overseeing an enormous health agency that spends about $1.5 trillion a year. Selena Simmons-Duffin, NPR News, Washington.
Trump has also selected Matthew Whitaker to be his ambassador to NATO, the military alliance whose European members the president-elect's accused of failing to contribute their fair share toward defense. That would include contributions toward Ukraine's defense against Russia. Well, the Biden administration has agreed to send landmines to Ukraine in an attempt to stop advances by Russian ground troops. NPR's Greg Myrie notes this is the second time in recent days the U.S. has changed policy and given Ukraine greater freedom to use U.S. weapons.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin confirmed the new policy as he spoke to reporters on a trip to Asia. He said Russia is sending waves of ground troops towards Ukrainian forces, and Ukraine needs the landmines to, quote, slow down that effort. The mines will be for use in eastern Ukraine, where Russian forces have been making incremental gains and are placing the greatest pressure on the Ukrainians. The Biden administration had opposed landmines as part of a larger global trend to halt their deployment worldwide. In recent days, President Biden also agreed to let Ukraine fire U.S. ballistic missiles into Russian territory. Greg Myrie, NPR News, Washington.
U.S. stocks are trading lower. The Dow is down 56 points. This is NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. Waiting for my screen to move. Oh, here we go. The Institute of Contemporary Art Boston has announced that Nora Burnett Abrams has been appointed to the museum's next director. Burnett Abrams succeeds Jill Medvedow, who will step down at the end of March next year. Over the 26 years, Medvedow has transformed the ICA into one of the leading centers for contemporary art in the country And Abrams comes to the ICA from the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver, where she has been its director since 2019. She'll begin her new role on May 1st, 2025. And although we're looking at rain arriving tomorrow, Massachusetts is now in the third month without significant rainfall. State environmental officials say drought conditions in Massachusetts are critical. John Bender reports.
With the exception of the Cape, the drought is intensifying in every region. It's contributing to the unprecedented number of ongoing wildfires. The lack of rainfall is also draining water supplies. Vandana Rao is Director of Water Policy for the state. She says the situation is not likely to change in the next 30 days.
There's going to be some rainfall this Thursday. So we're hoping that that will start to at least stabilize conditions a little bit. One rainfall event is not going to turn things around, but it can certainly help.
The Department of Environmental Protection is helping local communities manage their water supplies. For the New England News Collaborative, I'm John Bender.
53 degrees, sunny sky. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments. Fisher is committed to helping clients stay on track to reach their financial goals and enjoy a comfortable retirement. FisherInvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss.
Welcome to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio. We're broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Jim has the day off, but I'm joined today by former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety and Sheriff of Suffolk County, Andrea Cabral. Hello again, Andrea.
Hello again, Marjorie.
Okay, we want to remind you of our text prompt of the day at 877-301-8970. Amazon is forcing workers to come back to the office 5 days a week. Is your company moving in that direction too? Give us a text, 877-301-8970. We want to hear your thoughts about returning to work, how you're navigating it, if you're avoiding it, if you want to go in every day, maybe you'd like a couple of days a week, who knows? Tell us at 877-301-8970. Right now we're joined at the BPL desk by Shirley Leung, Boston Globe business columnist and host of the Say More podcast. Hello, Shirley.
Hi,
Hello,
Marjorie.
Shirley.
Hi, Andrew. I'm here for the estrogen surge.
That's right, the estrogen surge. That's right.
No injection
We're surging.
necessary. I say this to you all the time, Shirley, about how many your guest list is always absolutely amazing, but this particularly so in this case, where you've got Connie Chung. I'm going to play a clip, a preview clip from your upcoming interview with Connie Chung. She's explaining how she came to share the hosting seat with Dan Rather on CBS News. I suspect some tea is about to be spilled. Here's a clip.
It was not necessarily a great idea because it's a very short broadcast, half an hour long, which means it's only really 20 minutes of airtime, and it's hard to split that between two people. Also, he really didn't want to have me there. It didn't matter if I was a man or a woman, an animal or a plant. It just didn't matter. I think he didn't want to share the seat.
Boom.
Boom.
Wow.
You didn't expect to hear from Connie. I was
No.
right out of my seat when I was talking to her.
Yeah, good for her.
And the earlier part of the clip is all equally kind of, you're like, whoa, I can't believe she went there. Because I asked her, I said, so why did CBS bring you on? So she was back in, I think, 1993, right? At the time when she was named co-anchor of the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. Dan Rather had been anchoring the news, and she was brought on, and she was the second woman to anchor an evening newscast and the first Asian American. And I said, well, so why did they bring you on if Dan didn't want you there? It's like, well, because his ratings were tanking. That's what she said. That's why they brought me in.
Really?
And she tells this story, and her memoir is amazing. And it's even better as an audiobook because she does the audio herself.
Oh, good.
And so that's how I listen to it, through her audiobook. And her audiobook, and the memoir is just called Connie. And she tells this story that, so she gets named, and Dan's like, let's go to a coffee shop and let's, get to know. I mean, they knew each other. She'd been a journalist a TV reporter for a long time. time, an anchor, and he tells her, well, I guess, Connie, this means you have to start reading the newspaper. What? And she had covered presidents. She had covered,
my God.
That's amazingly condescending.
Exactly. She had done it all at that point. When she was named a co-anchor with Dan Rather, and it only lasted 2 years. And her book is terrific. Now, Connie Chung is like an idol to me.
Right.
I watched her growing up, and in fact, when in her prime, when she was probably in the 80s and 90s, you talked to a young Asian American female journalist like myself. When I started out in the late 90s, I remember knocking on a door, in Boston. I'm like chasing some crime story or whatever. I'm knocking on the door, and then you hear on the other side, I think Connie Chung is here. I think Connie Chung is here. Other Asian American journalists will say the same thing.
Oh my God, that's
they think we're Connie Chung.
Did it get you in the door?
We did. I think I did get the interview.
Well, you said people named babies after Connie Chung.
So this is a great part of the story. So a few years ago, what was so interesting is that she thought that she was kind of failed because after no one remembered Connie Chung. She kind of failed.
Oh, I do. I thought she was great.
Right. And so after she left, she was pushed out by Dan Rather in 1995. She went on to do some other things, but she really never regained that stature she had, right? And so she's been laying low. And then a few years ago, or maybe it was last year now, very recently, there was a Connie called her, an Asian Connie called her. I think Connie Wong is her name, and said, I've been doing some research, and she was in her 20s or maybe 20s or early 30s, and she said, there are a lot of Asian Connies out there, and I've been tracking them, and I think all these Connies were named Connie because their parents saw you on TV, right, and they decided to name their Asian American daughter. There's Korean Connies, there's Chinese Connies. Connie Chung is Chinese American. She was born in the U.S. She was actually the youngest of 10 kids.
She was?
Yeah, and she's the only one.
Oh my God!
The only one born in the U.S. All her siblings were born in China, and so she got to meet. It was this New York Times story, so she got to meet all the other Asian Connies, and she was floored, and she realized, wow, I do have a legacy. I did make an impression, after all these years, and it was great because she'd already started writing her memoir, and this was the perfect kind of last chapter to her memoir, and she felt like I have made a difference, and she's I mentioned she's the youngest of 10 kids, all girls. And and her dad said, well, there were boys, but they didn't make it. Yeah, they didn't make it. They died as infants. Oh. And so her dad had said to her, it's like, I want the Chung name to live on, and he said, it's up to you. Is it up to you? I never had a son, so it's up to you to kind of carry our name on and make an impression in the world. So that's why she ended up writing the book, to kind of fulfill this promise to her dad that she would carry on the name. And anyway, but she tells us another great story about when the Times put this together, brought all the Asian Connies together. They did a photo shoot.
That's right.
Not only the writer was an Asian, Connie Wong, but so was the photographer, Connie Aramaki. Really? She was I think a Japanese American, and this Connie was saying, telling her that I growing up, I resented Connie Chung because my parents put so much pressure on me to be just like Connie Chung, and she didn't want to be like a journalist or a TV. But then she realized after meeting the real Connie, the original Connie Chung, that it's like her parents, they wanted me not to be a TV journalist, but they wanted me to be brave and take risk and be bold, like Connie Chung. That's what they wanted me to be. And so she feels like now, and I can't believe that she didn't think her life, that she made a big difference, that she had an impact. And I asked her, why didn't you think that? And she's like, well, because I'm sitting there and like I'm reading the news and I'm looking at the camera and I had no idea.
Well, you know where I also thought she had an impact too? She talked a lot about her infertility struggles.
Yes.
And I thought she made a big impact there too.
And I didn't know that until reading the book.
Yeah.
That she I guess
she had Maury Povich.
Right, Maury Povich was her husband. Actually, during the interview, Maury called twice.
Yeah, he had kind of these talk shows that were maybe a little bit on the low rent side, I would say.
Right.
I don't think it was quite as classy as Connie Chung.
No. But there was a whole chapter in a book about Maury because I've always wondered how did they
they
get together?
They don't seem like a match made in heaven.
Anyway,
do they?
So she had. I mean, if you think about it, she probably had IVF in the late 80s, early 90s at a time when nobody was talking about this stuff. And she ended up never having a child of her own. She did adopt, though.
Yep.
And basically, a few days after she left the anchor chair, she found out that they were finally able to adopt a baby boy. And so
that was great. She had a new vocation, being
yes.
An older mother, because she was older by then.
I think she might have been 50.
Yeah.
50 when she had adopted a baby.
Well, that's good for her. I thought she was great. And I mean, she was in that whole era when all these women got shunted aside. Barbara Walters got shunted aside.
Right. It has a huge impact on your self-esteem and whether or not you feel you've left a legacy. So I'm glad she got to the point where she
I'm always worried about being shunted aside myself. It's one of those things I worry about.
That will never happen,
Never
Marjorie.
happen. Yeah, that's right. Never going to happen.
Never happen.
So here's a great story, and I'm glad the Globe did this. I didn't know this, that we are almost, well, maybe we are unique, or New York City's about to make landlords cover most of the broker fees, so that makes us unique, that in Boston, to get an apartment, you often have to pay first month, last month security deposit.
Yeah, I think we are unique.
And the broker fee, so we are unique. I mean, we got to get rid of this to deal with the housing issues here.
And there have been efforts in the past to get rid of this broker's fee. I mean, think about it. If you're renting a place for what? $3,000.
Yeah,
right?
that's a lot of money.
Is that $12,000 out of the gate?
First, last, brokers, and security deposit, that's $12,000.
Yeah.
No, or is it more?
First, last security deposit and broker's fee.
Yeah.
Security's deposit is usually
12,
one whole month.
$12,000.
Yeah, $12,000.
Who's got $12,000 sitting around?
Right. So, but now I've come to learn that this morning, I think it was it in Politico or one of the newsletters this morning that a city councilor is going to try to push through some kind of resolution.
Oh, Enrique Pepin.
Yeah, to look at getting rid of broker fees. So I think that's
but there's a problem, right? Doesn't this have to go through the legislature like everything else around here? This is another disgrace.
You should be glad Jim isn't here today because he would be railing.
But it is a disgrace. If Boston wants to get rid of brokers' fees, why the hell should they have to wait for the legislature, which hardly ever does anything unless they're ashamed in doing it, to do something?
Well, you also have the influence of the real estate industry on all of those legislators and the money that
many of
the
whom
lobbying
are
and the money.
big-time real estate owners themselves.
Right.
No, I do think but it doesn't have to be a Boston thing. It could be statewide too, right? Though I guess it's most relevant in Boston because of the hot real estate market. But the state, I think Healy did try to get rid of brokers' fees in one of the earlier versions of a housing
bill,
but it didn't make it
But
through.
I mean, this is what's. I was just going to say, there's an urgent problem here. We talk about people can't afford the housing, people are leaving the state, young people leaving the state. They could fix this tomorrow. Well, they are on vacation still. Are they back from vacation yet? I'm not sure. Okay. But I mean, they could fix this right away. This would make such a difference. And we don't get that it's a crisis here.
See, and I think the pushback from the landlords is, well, if you make us pay the broker's fees, then we'll just pass that on in the rent. But I think that is a much more difficult thing for them to do because when you pass it on in the rent, then you're in competition with people who offer lower rents for similarly sized, similarly outfitted apartments, and then it's landlord against landlord.
Right.
And the bottom line on this, what makes it so unfair, is that the broker is doing the work for the landlord. Why should a tenant pay for services being rendered to a party other than the tenant?
Right.
So that's what makes it unfair.
I think it should be our new crusade. We'll speak with Jamie and Jim about it.
I'm glad
get rid of the brokers' fees.
Right. I'm glad Pepin is getting the conversation started, and especially since it looks poised to pass in New York.
Okay, now there's something related to this with the housing crisis here in Boston. There has been, they have passed this bond bill, this housing thing up at the State House finally, never late than never. But what they did is they exempted this organization, Blue Hub Capital.
Yes.
from
this is the econ dev bill.
Yes.
What do they do? First, tell people what Blue Hub does.
Well, I think that they give mortgages right out, and they're housing, and they're a lender, and the particular program that they run, I always think of it as the lender of last resort, right? These are people who I guess it's a controversial program. These are people who are about to have their home be foreclosed out of their homes, and Blue Hub comes in and gives them a loan that allows them to stay in their house. But as the house appreciates, they get paid back. They share in the appreciation of the home. And that's the controversial part, because and I think they've been sued over this. That there's not enough guardrails to prevent the homeowner from benefiting from the proceeds of a sale.
So do they give them a mortgage, or do they buy the house that's being foreclosed on and then sell it back to?
It might be, yeah.
But they also seem to help them get mortgages. That's the part that I'm not exactly clear on.
The story in the Globe says that what they do is they buy. This is Matt Stout and Andrew Brinker. Yeah. They buy properties from banks that are foreclosing, then resells them to the original owners, and as part of the deal, the homeowners take on a so-called shared appreciation mortgage that entitles Blue Hub to a portion of any increase. But we've had Bruce Marks on a ton of time on the show, and he's a kind of a crusader. Well, he is a crusader for getting people homes, and I have a lot of respect for him. He calls this the epitome of corruption. I don't know if he's right, but he has a good track record in this regard, and they're alleged to be predatory lenders in the sense that when they do sell the house, as you say, the Blue Hub gets a big chunk of the
equity. When the value appreciates. So you basically are benefiting from increased property values over time, versus if you've just got a regular mortgage, you would be charged interest, and that's the money that they would make. They don't gain an equity interest in your property. They simply charge you interest on the original amount.
And they're exempt from the consumer protection laws in the state.
Which means they're exempt from civil liability, that's where people are having a problem.
Because they've been sued, and so this law, this amendment would... I guess it'd probably make the suit go away, right?
I would think so, if you don't fall under those same protections. And that was my question when I read it, which is, clearly they are helping people whose homes are being foreclosed upon. Why would the legislature exert its power to exempt someone from civil liability when they could simply put protections in the bill that say, these are there are some things you're doing right, or any nonprofit, similarly situated nonprofit, we'll call it. These are the things you're doing right. These are the things you cannot do. Mm-hmm. A blanket immunity, which we all have a lot of experience with in 2024, is an extraordinary step.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of people in the real estate business that are in the legislature. That may not be the reason. That's not fair of me to say. It definitely is the reason. But the Attorney General, Andrea Campbell, is not keen on this Blue Hub thing either. And we talked to people from Bay State Manor. They're not keen on the Blue Hub.
Well, it takes away her, but the AG has the ability to go after you civilly. And I think under this, it takes away the power of the Attorney General to go after a predatory lender, not just individual homeowners.
Well, I'm curious to see if there's a workaround for the state.
Or whether they'll amend the bill or something.
amend the bill, clearly the bill. It sounds like the amendment was made to get rid of the lawsuits, the pending lawsuits.
Yeah, it's very odd, if you ask me. And this, I call it a housing bill. You're right; it's the economic development bill. That they would go to this length to exempt these people. I don't know. I'm suspicious.
All right, Shirley. So one of many rough beasts slouching toward Bethlehem, since we did Yeats' Second Coming the last time I was here. One of the many rough beasts that's slouching towards Bethlehem is the impending oligarchy.
Oh, yes.
So what do you think? What do you think about the impending oligarchy? And you think it'll fare well with this White House or not?
So, in the course of writing this story...
This is a great column, by the way.
It is a great column.
In the course of writing this story, I was mentioning all the billionaire donors, right, that have their hands in the transition and the Trump transition team and also White House. And it seems like every time literally by the time I filed the story and I got edited and before it printed, the kind of billionaire donors actually were nominated for all these cabinet jobs, they had actually sorted out. So two people in particular, Howard Lutnick and Linda McMahon.
Yep.
Linda McMahon and her husband, founder of World WWE, right?
Yeah.
They're billionaires.
Worldwide wrestling.
And
they're very involved in the schools, worldwide wrestling.
Yeah.
And they were giving $20 million to one of the biggest donors for the Trump campaign, gave $20 million. Howard Lutnick is the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, and they're the co-chair the transition team. And meanwhile, at the same time, they've been jockeying for jobs, and so
Roger Whitcoff plays golf with them, gave him like $35 million. Yep.
Right. So
she was involved with America First. Remember we talked about America First?
She's one of the founders of the America First Policy
We talk a lot about Project 2025, but in many ways, when you look at America First, it's scarier than Project 2025.
Right.
But anyway.
Right. So Linda McMahon was the head of the SBA in Trump's first administration. Now she's going to be the education secretary, and or I should say nominated to be the education secretary. And Howard Lutnick, he was actually in the running for Treasury Secretary as of over the weekend, but now he was named the Commerce Secretary, or nominated to be the Commerce Secretary. So, it's a story about how all these billionaires are lining up. The amount of quid pro quo will be incredible because this Trump White House, they're open for business. They're open for any and all deals.
You've got money, we've got time.
Exactly.
No, it's true. He actually said it to all of the fossil fuel industry billionaires. He said, he's on videotape. I know you have the money. You put $15 million into my account, and we don't have to worry about clean energy or solar or wind or any of those things. He's for sale, and that means the country's for sale.
Right. And the other industry to watch out is cryptocurrency.
Right.
That sector put in an incredible amount of money into to legislators that are pro crypto, and also to defeat crypto skeptics. And I think the crypto industry represented almost half of all corporate giving, political giving this year. And so they are expecting something in return.
And he's personally involved in cryptocurrency. He announced that as well.
And it's interesting because not that long ago, he called Bitcoin a scam. And now over the summer, he's like, we will make the U.S. the Bitcoin superpower.
Because they gave him money.
Exactly. So, but there is one silver lining.
What is that?
I talked to Robert Reich, the former labor secretary.
Oh yeah, yes, that's right.
And he said, "Listen, we're living in the second Gilded Age right now. The first one was ended in the early 1900s.
1890s.
And if history will show that." Kind of these billionaires will overreach. These oligarchs will overreach, and then there will be a revolt, and there'll be the beginning of the progressive era, and so but it could be really bad.
Right, the damage that they will do in the meantime will be pretty incalculable.
But there is a sense that it's too much, and that there's too much. They'll implode. But we just don't know if that's going to happen next year or in 4 years.
There's another country.
Nobody wants the French Revolution in order to make that happen.
There's another country that we routinely refer to as an oligarchy. Of course, that would be Russia. So maybe there'll be some tips shared between the two leaders.
Oh, I'm sure best practices will be shared.
Shirley, thank you very
much.
Shirley. Great column. Something else to worry about.
And congrats on Connie Chung.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Shirley Leung, Boston Globe business columnist and host of the Say More podcast. Up next, today is Transgender Day of Remembrance. We'll speak with civil rights attorney Alejandra Caraballo. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the BPL and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Trusted. Local. News.
I'm Jeremy Siegel. Donna Summer was larger than life.
She did 3 consecutive double albums, and all 3 of them went platinum.
And the Queen of Disco is now immortalized in a mural that, fittingly, is also larger than life.
This, I think, is a 50-foot by 60-foot wall.
It runs along the side of Black Market in Nubian Square.
She comes from here, like we damn well should be celebrating her more.
Dedicated to what matters to you. GBH 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And the International Conservation Fund, working to fight biodiversity loss and climate change by supporting local communities and indigenous peoples in their efforts to conserve nature globally. Learn more at internationalconservationfund.org. And the Trustees, presenting Winter Lights, a celebration of seasonal sparkle, with light displays in Stockbridge, North Andover, and Canton, Massachusetts. Advance tickets required. More at thetrustees.org/winterlights.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Andrea Brawl is in for Jim Browdy. We are streaming at youtube.com/GBH News, and we are broadcasting from the Boston Public Library. I want to repeat our text prompt for the day, 877-301-8970. Amazon's making workers come back to the office 5 days a week. What do you think? Are you worried about it at your company? Have they already done it? Are they going to do it? If you've been always working 5 days a week, you're sick of hearing people complain about coming back to work more than 2 or 3 days a week, text us at 877-301-8970. But right now, today marks the 25th annual Transgender Day of Remembrance, a chance to pause and reflect on the trans people in this country who've been persecuted, brutalized, and killed for living as their truest selves. At this moment, it's a particularly hard one for the trans community. Over the past few years, they've been forced into political crosshairs of politicians on both sides of the aisle. Here to bring some clarity to this moment, especially facing a new old administration in Washington, we are joined by Alejandra Caraballo. She is a clinical instructor at Harvard Law School's Cyber Law Clinic, a former staff attorney at the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, an activist for LGBTQ rights. You can find her at Blue Sky at squeer.net. That's ESQUEER, squeer.net. Thank you for coming back to the show. Good to see you again.
Well, thanks for having me back on.
Thank you.
Very nice to meet you and have you on, Alejandra. I want to start with getting into the Transgender Day of Remembrance and the kinds of events, why we have a Transgender Day of Remembrance, because in a minute we're going to get into the reasons why we have to have a Transgender Day of Remembrance that are alive and well in 2024. So start with this Day of Remembrance.
Yeah, so this is the 25th Trans Day of Remembrance. It started because 2 Black trans women were killed here in Boston. Rita Hester in Alston and Chanel Pickett in Watertown. And so basically in 1999, they decided we needed to remember trans folks that have been lost to violence, especially to violence fueled by hate against trans people. And globally this year, we've already lost over 350 people to anti-trans hatred and violence against our community.
So what kinds of, on the Day of Remembrance, what kinds of events are held? Where can people go to observe this, learn about the folks that are being remembered, and what they can do to get involved in terms of advocacy?
Yeah, so there's going to be quite a few events across Boston. I have so many to
just whatever you can, because it's over. I mean, I'm glad for the support and the outpouring, but anything that you can point folks to would be good.
Yeah, and so there's going to be vigils throughout the city, across the country. But I think right now, we need to remember and honor the dead and in that way and those that we've lost. But we also need to fight like hell for the living, because right now we are in a very precarious time for the trans community. And I think it's more critical now that people show their support for the folks that are still here with us, because we're really going to need it.
Well, even though the trans community is relatively small, they became a massive issue in this election. We saw the constant ads, particularly on NFL football games on Sundays, denigrating.
$215 million they spent on those ads.
Yeah, $215 million they spent on those ads. And tragically, I think that they mattered. I think that they did matter. But what do you think about those ads in terms of the impact on the election before we get to the latest out of Congress with Nancy Mace?
Yeah, look, this has been the political project of the far right for not just this election, but the prior midterm elections and broader project for the last 5 years. And the $215 million number, that's just what we know from broadcast TV. From, if you include digital ads and everything else, is probably closer to $500 million spent on this election on an issue that only affects less than 1% of the population. And so this is a classic scapegoat wedge tactic. They pick a very small minority that they know that most people have never met. Only 42% of folks have even met a trans person. And so it's very easy to demonize us. It's very easy to scapegoat us when most people don't know a trans person, and then you throw $500 million behind that kind of messaging. And so that's effectively what it is. But that means that the Republicans and the conservatives, they don't have answers or solutions for why inflation is, they won't be able to solve inflation. They won't be able to solve the price of groceries or the price of housing. They're just going to continue to say it's trans people that are causing all your fault. And last I checked, we're not the ones raising your rent. We're not the ones raising the price of eggs. Those are the billionaires that they're stocking up this administration with.
And I will say, they manage to always, put the most, sort of execrable faces on this kind of hatred. And that's all it is it's hatred and it's bigotry and it's fear-mongering. So Nancy Mace, who from time to time has had revolts among her own staff who say she's insufferable to work for and never met a camera or a microphone she didn't fall in love with, introduced a bill to bar trans women from using the restrooms at the Capitol. And she did this right after Sarah McBride, who is the first trans person to be elected to Congress, was elected. So tell people about this bill and what the response to this bill should be, both by advocates and by regular people who should be outraged by it.
Yeah, I mean, this is pure bullying of Sarah McBride. Like, This is very much targeted, but it's not just going to affect her. It's going to affect staff. It's going to affect trans interns working for congressional members and their ability to even function within Congress. And so this is a very targeted bill. But at the end of the day, they never want to talk about the specifics of how they're actually going to enforce this, right? Because if you have a trans man who is fully bearded, was assigned female at birth, and you're essentially mandating that that person has to use the women's bathroom, like what Nancy Mace is actually doing is saying, no, men actually have to use the bathroom, trans men. And so, they never want to talk about actual enforcement, and unless she wants to become Captain Genital Inspector.
Right. She says the
honestly,
Sergeant at Arms has to do it, who is like 500 years old, isn't it? A very old Sergeant at Arms.
I don't know. William McFarland.
Is he supposed to pat people? I mean, how is it? You're right. How is it enforced?
Not clear how they're going to enforce this.
And by the way, can I just say that when she was at the Citadel, Nancy Mace, they changed the bathroom policy to accommodate her as a woman because the Citadel was men only. So, laws for thee, but not for me kind of thing.
Exactly.
So we had Seth Moulton on our show earlier this month, and he got in some hot water. Some people defended him, but he made comments in the New York Times about his concerns with trans women in college sports, arguing Democrats should be more comfortable voicing these kinds of views to connect with voters. And this was after Trump won the election. Here's Moulton.
Why'd you pick this issue to lead with, I guess, is my question.
The New York Times picked it. Look, I
why'd you even say it? I guess is what I'm saying. But there's so many other identity politics. What?
Jim, this was literally the leading issue. Look at the poll. This was literally the leading issue why swing voters voted for Trump.
But who was advancing the issue? It was Republicans and ads.
Hey, guess what? That's my point, Jim. They're setting the terms of the debate. So we're just going to ignore it?
So,
shame on him.
What would you say to Seth Moulton?
Yeah, our community is under incredible attack, and he just said they're setting the terms of the debate, and then he adopts their terms of the debate, like using the terms biological men in that way. What do you see Nancy Mace doing this week? She's calling Sarah McBride, quote unquote, a biological male, and so by already exceeding on the sports stuff and accepting those terms of the debate, he's already essentially saying, no, we're gonna not just cave on sports because it's not about sports. It really has never ever been about sports. Because the reality is, when the enforcement comes down, what we've seen in Florida, there was a 13-year-old trans girl who was playing volleyball with her friends in middle school, and armed police officers came and investigated her and her family because she was playing sports in Florida. Like, the reality of this, like, if you want to talk about this debate, and he said that he wasn't actually that informed, about this on the show. Like, that's what the reality is, and they don't want to talk about that. And so at the end of the day, like, if you accept those terms of the debate, like, appeasing on sports isn't going to stop this. We saw 23 states essentially ban trans people from sports in 2022, and a lot of advocates said, look, we'll just go ahead and let them have this issue. And then the next year they came in and banned gender-affirming care for trans youth. 26 states have now passed some restriction, some with restrictions on adults. It does not stop with that. This is their gateway drug, essentially, into passing restrictions on all trans people.
Well, you know, the day we had him on, I asked him about the idea that what I think I think one of the big issues here, when we used to talk about gay rights a million years ago, people would say, oh, well, they knew so-and-so was gay and they knew so-and-so was gay, and so they didn't want to do anything that's going to harm so-and-so. As you mentioned, very few people know someone who's trans. And I was saying to Andrew before the show, it shouldn't really be up to the trans community to do PR. But I think on the other hand, I think you don't have to be a horrible person to think, well, I'm concerned about my 17-year-old girl playing soccer with someone who has not gone through puberty blockers or somebody who's a bigger, stronger person. So explain to people that are, especially older people, that they think, what are we talking about here? Explain to people why this is a problem for the trans community to say you cannot play high school, and Moulton has changed his tune now. He's talking about high school and college sports, not younger kids' sports. But why people should stay out of this whole trans women in sports issue.
Look, I think ultimately this is a complex issue. You know, we can talk about like hormone suppression, androgen blockers, all these things.
Which they want to outlaw too.
Yes,
so you couldn't get them to suppress those hormones when you were 12. But anyway, go ahead.
Exactly. And like, look, some of the policies we had was a year or 2 years hormone suppression. There's some studies that have come out that essentially after someone transitions, like all of the advantages basically don't really exist. And so, you know, this is a complex issue, but I think that's best left for sports leagues. This is not, you know, we shouldn't have politicians coming in and directing this stuff, because most of these bans that have come through, like he mentioned co-ed leagues and things like that. Some of them have banned co-ed leagues. They've essentially also banned, like, even until elementary school, where no one is concerned about boys and girls playing when they're like 6 or 7 years old in a soccer game or a t-ball game. And so ultimately, like, yeah, we can talk about this, but that's not the broader issue. The broader issue is that they don't want us to exist. Because, like, as I've mentioned before, they've gone after and tried to ban trans women from chess. They've tried to ban chess, from pool, from darts, and they even made a huge issue about Amy Schneider winning on Jeopardy. And I don't remember there being a biological advantage on intelligence here. Right. And if you try to say that, then I think you really are stepping into some dangerous waters.
And that's, I mean, Adam Serwer coined the phrase, he writes for The Atlantic, that he said the cruelty is the point. The bigotry is the point. And to the point that both you and Marjorie have made, it is the gateway to everything else. It's the gateway to outlawing all protections for LGBTQ people. It's the gateway to all the anti-DEI stuff, all of the anti-affirmative action stuff. It's a gateway essentially to heterosexual white male supremacy. But here's the thing. Why is it so difficult to find effective messaging to people that that's what this is? Why is it so difficult to pry people away from their hatreds and their bigotry? Not that I expect you to have if we had the answer to that, right, we'd all be very happy people living peacefully amongst one another. But as you see it as an advocate, why does that elude us, the proper messaging?
Yeah, because again, like I said, only 42% of people actually even know a trans person. Once you know a trans person, you're much less likely to fall for this kind of stuff, because it's much harder to demonize someone that you actually know. It's harder to demonize a family member. And this is why, you know, the coming out of the closet campaign in the 80s and 90s, especially during the AIDS crisis, was so effective for the gay rights movement, because again, it was so much harder to demonize someone that you know. And the trans community is so much smaller than the rest of the queer community. And so that is always what's going to take work. And then on the other side is like, yes, they're framing a debate, but like this is a political project that they've had for years, literally going back to 2015, right after the Obergefell decision. The Family Research Council had a memo that said that they were going to use trans rights essentially as a wedge to come trans rights, but also on LGBTQ rights writ large. They saw this as the issue to get their foot back in the door and turn the tide on any progress at all.
So talk about the Trump Day. I'm sorry, Marjorie, go ahead.
No, well, that's what I was going to say. Trump's plans for day one.
And what
he
it
wants
means
to roll
for
back
healthcare, yeah.
Title IX protections. He doesn't want any hormone, gender affirming care. He's going to take away money from hospitals. I mean, I don't know what this means up at Children's Hospital up the street that are doing this kind of gender affirming care on minors. He wants to take away the ability of parents to decide what's best for their children and put that in the hands of politicians. So how concerned are you about the Trump administration?
I'm extremely concerned. They've made going after trans people essentially one of their top priorities. And for their whole attack being that Democrats are obsessed with trans people, like, this is literally their top priority. It's not about, economic issues and like actually making sure people have access to affordable housing or anything like that. It's going after trans people. And so it's incredibly worrying that they have these suite of executive orders, potentially administrative rules that are going to come down and not only ban funding for gender-affirming care, but essentially add in restrictions on that to basically outlaw it and make it impossible for any of us to access our health care that we very much need. And one of the things I would say to people, especially our allies, is we are such a small community and we do not have the kinds of political power to weather this kind of storm. Is we need allies to step up. And we need allies to not comply in advance. If you think these things are coming, if there's bathroom bans, what I've told people with the bathroom thing is do not comply. Like, the whole way that they're going to enforce any kind of actual compliance with this is through fear and intimidation. And the way that you defeat that is by not being fearful and not being intimidated by this and saying, we will not comply in advance, and we will just go on as business as usual until you forcefully make us stop.
So what should Sarah McBride, the trans congressperson, do up on Capitol Hill?
I think she should just continue using the bathroom just like anyone else. If they want to make a spectacle out of this,
arrest her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
right. Make people see how hateful they are.
Yeah. Show them actually arresting a colleague here for just going just peeing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I was going to ask you about that. So I'm sure. I mean, first of all, her response to Nancy Mace was just absolutely, you see her response, her level of sort of, equanimity around it, and just saying basically what you just said, Alejandra, which is, well, why do you think they would do something like this? It's because they have no plan for you for housing. They have no plan for you to lower the price of your eggs, if that's what's important to you. They have no infrastructure plans for you to carry on what Joe Biden has started. She was being a legislator, so she's going to have to find her allies within Congress.
Yeah.
What can regular voters, concerned citizens do in terms of pushing those allies her way, both at the state level and at the federal level? So give us some weapons to kind of help all of this.
Yeah, I mean, we have several Congress members here. Catherine Clark is the minority whip here. She runs a lot of the vote counting operation. Essentially, like, call them. Let them know. Call your congressperson. Also, call your state legislator, because states are going to be the bulwark against these attacks. We're going to need to make sure that both the attorney general, the governor, and our state legislature have our backs, and essentially are going to say, no, we're not going to allow the federal government to do overreach. For the longest time, Republicans have been the party of states' rights. Well, we're about to prove how consistent they are about that when states say, no, we're not going to go after our own trans citizens.
Alejandra, before you go, what kind of stories are you hearing from your community about the election?
I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's dire. I've had to personally talk people out of crisis, close friends of mine. We've seen a 700% increase in calls to suicide prevention hotlines such as Trevor Project. I would say the trans community is in an absolute state of crisis right now, extremely fearful. And it is really a difficult moment trying to not just keep it together myself as a trans person, but also to make sure I can be there for the rest of my community.
Sorry.
This is some people have got to understand this is life and death to people. The immigrant community feels the exact same way. They feel targeted by all of these things. this is, you can't in the United States of America think that it's okay if the person, you elected hates who you hate, that they're going to just make the people that you hate suffer and you'll be doing fine. The knock at the door is going to come for you sooner or later. So wake up and stop making people suffer unduly for this kind of stuff. I mean, there was a story in The Nation about Natick, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And considered sort of a liberal bastion in Massachusetts. And the idea that there's this sort of transphobic hate cropping up in a place that used to be sort of a haven for LGBTQ youth, and we're seeing it happen. If they and the thinking among these extremist groups is, if we can get Massachusetts to do this, we can get anywhere to do this. So, can you speak to that a little bit? Certainly, it's reflected in the number of calls you've been getting.
Yeah, and I mean, I would always refer to the classic poem by Martin Niemöller, which is like, first they came for. And I think it's a reminder of why it's important to stand up for the trans community and for immigrant communities and others, is because first they came for us, right? Like, they're coming for us right now. And the way that the propaganda frames it is, first they came for trans people, but I did not speak out because I thought they were gross or icky. Like, that's how it actually comes across to people. I'm not a member of that community. And so ultimately, like, the things that they're focusing towards us right now, the kinds of gender bureaucracy, the kinds of Orwellian tactics that they're using, can easily be redirected to other groups. What they're doing to gender affirming care can be done to abortion, legal access to abortion here in Massachusetts. It can be done to go after any other group. And so it is incredibly important for people to speak out in this moment.
Alejandra, thank you so much for coming in. And like I said, I'm very sorry that your community is going through this at this particular time. One of our texters says they find it ironic. This is a trans person who says, I find it rich that elected officials with track records full of sexual misconduct are pushing so hard against the LGBTQ and trans community on the grounds of sexual identity.
It's always the hypocrisy. Yeah. It's always the projection. You don't have to be cruel. In fact, it's pretty easy to not be cruel. And just think about that. Think about the example you're setting for your kids as well, if they see you out here doing this kind of stuff. Thank you, Alejandra.
Thank you.
Alejandra Caraballo is an American civil rights attorney. She's also a clinical instructor at Harvard Law School's Cyber Law Clinic. Keep going after Elon Musk, by the way. She's also a former staff attorney at the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund and an activist for LGBTQ rights. You can find her at Blue Sky at esquire.net. That's ESQUEER.net. Up next, our tech segment of the day is So Much for the Hybrid Work Week. Is your office mandating that you go back to work 5 days a week? Are you badging in just to get a cup of coffee and sneaking out? We'll find out next. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the BPL and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
I'm Jared Bowen. Coming up on The Culture Show, something wicked this way comes to a theater near you. Ahead of its nationwide release, best-selling author Gregory Maguire, who wrote the book that created the Wicked Verse, joins us to talk about what inspired him to envision another entry into the Land of Oz. From there, we get into the spirit of Thanksgiving by way of community servings, serving free meals to people in need. Celebrity chef Joanne Cheng joins us for that conversation. That's on The Culture Show today at 2 on 89.7 GBH.
Support for our programs comes from you. And community servings, creating access to the healthy nutrition that people need in order to improve their health and well-being for 34 years. Serving medically tailored meals across all of Massachusetts. Learn more at servings.org. And Mass General Brigham Health Plan, ranked /1 in member satisfaction among commercial health plans in Massachusetts by J.D. Power for the second consecutive year. Details at mgbhp.org/everyday.
Marjorie.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I was chatting there with our guests over there. I'm sorry about that. We are live at the Boston Public Library, and we are streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Okay, it is time for our tech segment of the day. Amazon is requiring workers to come back to the office 5 days a week. Many other businesses are following suit, either with a few in-office days mandated weekly or up to 5 days there with no excuses. So, What do you think? We're going to read some of these texts as we face 2025, almost 5 years into the pandemic-fueled change in how we live and work. Are you wedded to your flexible work schedule, or are you open to going back to the way things were before COVID? Andrea, you want to give us your take? You got any good texts?
There are some good texts. Robert from Randolph says, the company wants us 4 days in the office. He says, I go in 5 times, but I stay for 2 hours and then go home to log in and finish the day at home. So he makes an appearance, which is apparently what they want, and then he finishes his work at home. One of our anonymous texters says, to quote Jim's favorite New Yorker cartoon, how about never? Is never good for you? That's when I'm headed back to the office 5 days a week. Julian Milton says that she's so sick of boomer bosses telling her that she has to get into the office to get experience and get to know people. Why? It's my career. I get the job done. I don't need endless talks in the kitchen, dealing with the abusers and everywhere else in the office. And without a commute, I have more time for what matters, which is my kids.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. So do we have any, here's John from Boxford. I got a couple too. In this new economy, companies will not hesitate to outsource anything that can be done remotely. For all the people feeling entitled to work from home, be careful what you wish for. Physically go into work. People with some exceptions, it's better for your mental health and your professional development. Now, what do you think? Do you think could you do all day, every day at home, or would you like to go in a couple of days a week? I mean, you're here with me today.
No, I mean, listen, I don't have a problem with remote work, but I think when we have the debate about whether we should have the 4-day work week like a lot of countries that are not the USA have, I think there's going to be a sweet spot where companies are going to start demanding people to come back in at least part of the time. That we have the debate about 4-day work week is just as productive as 5 days. So the sweet spot will probably be a 3-day or a 2.5 day. There are some benefits to being in an office, but I don't think having worked remotely, just before the pandemic and during the pandemic, that it's necessary for people to go in for a full work week. On the other hand, people who have essential jobs and first responders, as one of our texters points out, teachers, nurses, doctors, dentists, their assistants, bank workers are in the office, or whatever environment 5 days a week. That a texter tells everybody to suck it up and show up to work.
Well, as Shirley had in her column, we didn't get a chance to ask her about it today, but she talked about how the financial district, where the rents have plummeted for office buildings, and that's one of the tax issues that's plaguing Boston, but that business is coming back there, but it's only coming back on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays because people are still working at home on Mondays and Fridays. That's what I think would be great. Either you get 4 days, either Monday off or Friday off, or you get 3 days in with Monday and Friday off, 'cause then you can have a nice long weekend and do your laundry and all those kind of things.
That is kind of ideal. But it is. But the point that the texter made about, I think her name was, let me just grab her name. Her name was Julian Milton. You do spend an inordinate amount of time at work standing in people's doorways chatting about things that have nothing to do with work, or going to the kitchen and chatting over coffee, or fending off, unwanted sexual advances from a higher up. There's a lot of stuff that you do at a workspace that's, quite frankly, time-consuming and unnecessary.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time gossiping at the workplace when I was there all the time, and I found like I get a lot more done at home too. But on the other hand, the one thing I do feel is tough is if you are young and you're just starting out in your career, you don't get the same mentoring, you know what I mean, over Zoom, or you don't get the social opportunities. I mean, how many people, their best friends are people that they met at work? I mean, I'm sure a lot, that was true for you, that was certainly true for me. You don't get that if you're never there.
It's where people find people that they date as well. I mean, but there's also for new people, getting acclimated to an office largely comes through exposure, of people training you and on-the-job training, and you do miss out on that.
Okay, I've got one before we break here. Maybe you could point out to Jim the benefits of working remotely. No more smelly fish in the microwave oven.
Have
you noticed he does that? It is disgusting.
Yeah. People decide to make trout in the microwave.
Yeah.
Thank you for all of your texts. Coming up after the 1 o'clock news, Will Austin, the founder and CEO of the Boston Schools Fund, who's going to join us to talk about education. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. Live from the BPL.
Remember, you can access thousands of hours of PBS programs online with GBH Passport. If you're already a member, just register online today or become a member and sign up instantly at gbh.org/passport.
Support for GBH comes from you. And Direct Tire and Auto Service, committed to transparency in the auto repair business. Their team will text videos on the vehicle inspection process to help you understand the work they are considering. DirectTire.com. And Boston Ballet, presenting The Nutcracker. Beloved characters, luminous dancing, and Tchaikovsky's memorable score will enchant audiences of all ages this holiday season. On stage beginning November 29th. Official tickets at bostonballet.org.
I'm reporter Liz Niesloss, and you and I are listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you?
I'm Marjorie Egan. Ahead on hour number 3 of Boston Public Radio, Will Austin is founder and CEO of the Boston Schools Fund, a nonprofit that helps channel grants into city schools. He joins us to answer why schools essentially haven't changed in 100 years and what a new Trump term could mean for education in America and Massachusetts.
I'm Andrea Cabral, in for Jim Browdy. We're closing out today with you, talking about your favorite must-see escapist TV, and that would be baking show TV. If you haven't caught any of this season of the Great British Baking Show, you're missing out, but there's still time to get caught up before the season finale. Call or text us. Do you get the appeal of these kinds of wholesome baking reality shows? And if it's not Bake Off, what is the show that offers you your sweet escape in this era of dismal headlines? Your calls and texts are next. Ahead on Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the BPL.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. In a Georgia case that inflamed the nationwide debate over immigration this election year, Jose Ibarra, the man accused of murdering nursing student Laken Riley in February, was found guilty today. The defendant sat silently as family members, including Riley's mother, Allison Phillips, read their impact statements in court a short time ago.
Jose Ibarra took no pity on my scared, panicked, and struggling child. There is no end to the pain, suffering, and loss that we have experienced or will continue to endure.
Ibarra entered the U.S. illegally in 2022 and was allowed to remain while he pursued his immigration case. During his campaign, President-elect Trump repeatedly said Riley's killing was proof that the Biden administration's immigration and border security policies were weak. As Trump continues nominating supporters to his next cabinet, one big job remains open. NPR's Maria Aspen reports the race is on to be Trump's Treasury Secretary.
The next Treasury Secretary will be responsible for helping shape the nation's economy, including the tax cuts and sweeping tariffs the president-elect promised during his campaign. It's a crucial economic role, but the competition to be Trump's nominee has turned messy and public. Over the weekend, Elon Musk and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. both posted on X in support of one candidate, billionaire CEO Howard Lutnick. But now Lutnick is out of the race. Instead, Trump nominated him to be Commerce Secretary. The remaining apparent frontrunners for Treasury include two other billionaire investors, Mark Rowan and Scott Bessent, and a former Federal Reserve Governor, Kevin Warsh. Maria Aspen, NPR News, New York.
In Gaza, aid organizations managed to transport 6 patients, including 2 children, out of the Palestinian territory to receive life-saving treatment. But as NPR's Scott Newman reports from Israel, thousands more are waiting for medical evacuation.
A small convoy of ambulances began a brief journey from the European hospital at Han Yunis to the Rafah crossing along the Egyptian border. For the patients inside the vehicles, their cases are deemed too complicated for the relatively primitive care they can get in war-torn Gaza. Instead, they are destined for Jordan. Since May, when the Rafah crossing was closed, only 335 patients have been evacuated. The WHO says at least 14,000 more need to leave Gaza to get proper treatment. Scott Newman, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
U.S. stocks are trading lower this hour. The Nasdaq is down 136 points, or roughly 0.75%. It's NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. Brush fires are still burning in parts of Massachusetts, and they've now shattered previous records. State fire officials say the Commonwealth typically sees an average of about 20 brush fires in November, but this month there have been more than 400 fires and nearly 2,000 acres burned. State Fire Supervisor David Salino says that despite public burn bans, authorities are continuing to respond to fires fires caused by illegal outdoor burning. He says the public needs to respect these burns.
The situation that we're in, it is for real, and we ask them to really cooperate with the fire service. It puts firefighters at risk. It's very costly, and we need to hold out until we get a winter season here.
Good news is that rain is on the way tomorrow. Salino says they're hoping that the expected rainfall and a drop in temperature and wind speed will help contain some of those fires. A group of Brookline town leaders, including the police chief, members of the select board, and several school principals, want to restore the practice of assigning police officers to schools. Brookline News reports that if implemented, the move would undo a decision made in 2021 during the backlash to the Minneapolis police murder of George Floyd. In Brookline, the move to bring back officers in schools got a jump start last night at the select board meeting, at which the board voted 4-1 in favor of a non-binding resolution to recommend that officers do return to schools. The final decision, though, is up to the school committee, which is expected to consider that issue early next year. 55 degrees in Boston. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for chefs and designed for restaurants and home kitchens around the world. Their cookware can be found at madeincookware.com. This is NPR.
Jim Braude has the day off. Andrew Cabral, the former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety, is in for Jim Braude. Welcome to hour number 3 of Boston Public Radio. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. I'm really glad Jim's in here today because Jim and I always got into a big fight over the Teachers Union in Massachusetts, where he won the President's Award, and so he's been in the tank for the Teachers Union ever since. We're going to have a more...
Wow, he comes cheap,
Yeah, we're going to have a reasonable discussion here because we are joined at the library desk now by Will Austin, founder and CEO of the Boston Schools Fund. But more important, Will was also the Teacher of the Year when he was at the, what's it called?
Roxbury Prep.
Roxbury Prep, and you're also the principal there, so you have a long time in the classroom and being with kids. And one thing that you, because I am really worried about the schools, particularly schools in poor towns, particularly the schools in Boston, which are still struggling, and in poor towns all over the state, they're struggling. You wrote something that I heard before, which I think is so important to remember, that the schools have basically remained the same now for 100 years. We haven't really changed the schools to change the way people live 100 years distant from when we kind of began this template. So talk about what you think would make a difference, what we should be doing to change the schools. That's a big question.
It's a very big question.
It's a very big question, but there are a few things I'm sure at the top of your list.
Well, let's start with one thing that has changed.
Yeah.
And the one thing that has really changed, especially in the last 40 to 50 years, is we actually teach everybody. So up until the 1960s and 70s, we did not teach everyone in public schools. We definitely under-taught students of color. We marginalized kids with special needs. And so I don't think we've ever quite figured out what it means to teach all kids.
Yeah, that's a good
And we
point.
still have the same mode we had 100 years ago. I think the best evidence of what I describe is actually the pandemic. So you remember there may have been all these thought pieces back out in spring 2020, like, we won't go back. Schools will be different. We've experimented. We'll never go back. Guess what we did?
Went back.
We went right back.
Yeah.
And I think the real issue there is that schools, we think of schools as being static because we went to them and we were there at one time, but they're fluid. Kids and parents are constantly moving through it, and they're only there for a season. And so it's very difficult to make changes when you have that much of a dynamic constituency over time.
Well, the other big thing to me is that most mothers now are working. So the idea of getting out of school at 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon means you have kids home alone unless you can afford an after-school program or are lucky enough to get into one that's free. That's a huge change to me.
Yeah, and the United States, when you stack it up against other countries, is 8th for the amount of instructional time that kids get. So there's often this fallacy that we are in school a lot less than other industrialized nations. That's just not true. But as you pointed out, the workforce and demands have changed substantially, not just for the school day, but also for summer, right? Because now not only do we have folks working, but there's also folks working through the summer. And we haven't come up with a financial or labor model that'll fill those needs. And for now, they're just kind of filled by philanthropy, by initiatives, but there hasn't really been a solution for those extra hours every day and those extra weeks in the summer.
So I want you to get into specifically where you think the space for making the kinds of changes lies. And it's going to be a process. So how do we sort of jump head first into this process? But before you do, because we were just saying, you've just made a point before we came on air that I thought was amazing. I said, how is it that year after year, school leaders can go before the cameras in a press conference when school buses are not on time or there's some problem at the schools, and routinely talk about school progress that's half of what it should be, like the tamped down expectation over time, and tell people what your answer to that was, why we're not outraged by this.
Well, I can talk about it from a state perspective and then from a Boston perspective. From a state perspective, Massachusetts has a reputation of having good public schools, and through a lot of metrics, that's relatively true. What we also have in Massachusetts is highly decentralized public schools. So we have 351 cities and towns and school districts, about 1 million school-age kids. Maryland has 27 for 1 million school-age kids.
Wow.
And so what that allows folks to do is get theirs.
Right.
And they don't necessarily have to worry about those kids in that other town or that other city. And so it kind of tamps the need for reform. And in Boston specifically, I was just mentioned before the break, kind of public opinion's really shifted on this issue. And so if you go back to the mayor's races of 2009, 2013, education was the #1 issue. Not the case now, right? And when you look at public survey data, Boston families in general are more satisfied with their schools than they were 10 years ago. And so without a constituency, without a mandate, leaders don't have the push they need to reform.
But I thought you said that people are moving away from the Boston public schools.
Well, that's because they're moving out of Boston.
Yeah.
That's because of macro problems, housing, birth rates, educational levels. There's a variety of reasons why that's happening, but that's more about the inability for cities like Boston and San Francisco to support families, not just provide schooling.
So where's the 21st century's thinking that moves us beyond this static existence in education?
Well, I think a lot of it's going to end up being local, right? So connecting to the previous guest, given the madness that's going to be happening on the federal level, everything's going to have to happen in state and local communities. And so some of the best work I've seen in Boston has definitely been in East Boston.
Oh, yeah.
And the ability for neighborhoods and schools and school leaders to coordinate around long-term plans doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, but that's the necessary ingredient.
Well, we were talking with Kim Janey. She disagrees on this. I mean, and I'm not an expert, but you are. I mean, neighborhood schools, which Boston has been unable to achieve because we're busing so many kids all around the city, and we're not doing it for racial reasons anymore because it's a majority people of color system, also a majority poor system. But neighborhood schools seem to me, not just as Kim Janey said, so mothers can run in with cupcakes. It's because you have someone to help you take care of your kids if you get stuck late at work, or you've become friends with the kids next door and their parents, and there's a congealing around the school. But why can't Boston we've been talking about neighborhood schools forever. Why can't we get closer to that here?
Well, before answering that specifically, to put it in context, Boston is rare. Most major cities in the country, for at least their elementary schools, they're geocoded. They're neighborhood schools where you are assigned based on some catchment exactly where you live. And most major American cities don't provide busing.
Right.
So we're already a bit of an anomaly. So I want to point out the fact that it's very difficult to pull off the stuff we're talking about for a variety of reasons. Now, we changed student assignment in Boston in 2013.
Yep.
About a little over 11 years ago. And with the exception of a midterm report 6 or 7 years ago, there hasn't been a really deep analysis of whether or not the assignment system is actually working. I think that even if folks may have a different opinion about neighborhood schools and it elicits different reactions, it's definitely time to look at this assignment system and say, is it doing what we intended it to do? Because right now we have buses that are expensive that don't work. And in public policy, I don't mind expensive if it works.
Right.
But we have an expensive system that's not satisfying the needs of the consumers, and so we got to do something different.
Well, one of the things, obviously, with the neighborhood schools is Boston's usually segregated, too.
Yes, there's
so I think
that.
the fear is that you're going to have the less affluent parts of the city, the Mattapans and Dorchester, are not going to have schools as good as the Back Bay or Rosendale or West Roxbury, something like that. And that's a legitimate fear.
It is, but you can control for that through public policy. And so in other cities, to avoid that, because there's residential segregation in all cities, is that you create some choice programs, magnets, which are not selective, where you can elect into schools that are more racially diverse by design, for example.
Yep.
But that comes back to this issue of catchment, right? So in Maryland, to use them as an example, their schools are highly racially diverse because they're going across counties. And so you have the ability in the scale to create racially diverse schools. Boston doesn't have the scale to do that.
So you're talking about Boston being hooked up with Brookline
Sure.
or Newton,
Let's do it.
or you can see the fight over that, Andrea, can't you?
That sort of goes without saying. But the other component of this, and I have to say, it's completely with you. Read everything that you had written about the MCAS. The component of that, and I agree that doing away with the MCAS without even so much as a smidgen of language in that ballot question as to what you would replace it with, doing away with a standard and simply saying, and it's fine with us if you just leave that giant vacuum in terms of our children's learning, to me was just absolutely insane.
And it won big.
So when we're talking about this change of thinking and sort of thinking outside the box, doesn't this ballot, the legislature, they do this all the time. They're going to do it with that auditing ballot question. Can't the legislature tweak this rejection of MCAS to put in some substitute standard so that in the midst of trying to change the way we place kids in schools, there's an opportunity to change the way we actually teach them and those outcomes?
Yeah, and I think, and cards on the table, I was someone who opposed question 2.
Me too.
And
so did I.
And what I would say is that what was unfortunate about that debate is it didn't even resort to sound bites. It almost resort to memes. It's like, test bad. And that's very difficult to combat in a really competitive, busy political environment. I think that most people would agree that we should have a common standard or set of requirements, because that's, if you believe in equity, you have to have equal things and equal measures that go across districts. To answer your question, yes, the legislature could do something. And actually, I testified to the state board yesterday. The state board has a lot of regulatory power too. And it's been made very clear that they'll be interested in doing something to maintain some kind of consistent set of standards or requirements. Because to simply say, well, they all have the same frameworks, you can't say, well, just because every kid's supposed to learn fractions, we have an equal education system. That doesn't hold up to logic.
So you think that will happen?
If there's pressure on them, because the teachers union was against it, and the teachers union has lobbyists and a lot of money.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Why did this pass? I mean, because to me, one of the things that was so upsetting about it is if you didn't pass the MCAS in 10th grade, you were going to have 4 more times to take the test, and you would get that intensive training because school districts get rated on graduation rates, and you would want more kids to graduate. What I fear is that if you don't pass the MCAS in 10th grade, well, so you don't pass and you'll graduate not having those reading and writing skills under your belt.
But if you have different teachers of different quality, or schools of different quality, it means very different things for a graduate from this school than from a different one.
Yes.
So was it just the money that the MTA was able to raise? I mean, they raised much more than the opponents. Was that basically it?
Well, it's probably been that they outspent the opposition 3-1. They spent a lot of time. Think about this, and I say this in a way that is not critical. It's meant to just be explanatory. I mean, I grew up in a union household.
Me too.
Right? It is in their interest and it's their job to advocate for the best possible conditions for their members.
Right.
And that union does it very zealously. Good for them, right? That's their job.
Okay, so this is good for the teachers, you're saying.
Well,
Why was this good for the teachers?
Well, ultimately, you're trying to create the best working conditions. And so without the requirements we're talking about, you're given more latitude as an educator. And even if you look at the ads the MTA created, they centered it on that. It's like, let teachers teach what they want and let them be more creative and expand how they assess kids.
So do you think we have a real problem it seems to me from everything I've read, we do have a real problem in the urban schools that are not connected, as you mentioned before, like to the surrounding suburbs. So you taught for a long time in a charter school. You were a principal of a charter school. Voters voted to get rid of charter schools 2-1. Even though I was very impressed by the charter school you ran, and I used to go to the charter school lotteries in Boston, it was so sad. You'd have a mother come in with like 2 or 3 kids, and she was dying to get into a charter school. Almost nobody could in. They stopped doing them because they were so terrible. People were crying, and they were all upset. But as you pointed out in your writing, there is still a desire for charter schools. So why do you think that charter schools that get so criticized by opponents are doing a good job?
That's broader question than I can answer, and it's a little bit of ancient history. I think there was a political furnace that happened in 2016, and charter schools got kind of dragged into it, candidly. I think that was a big part of what happened.
Yeah, they can't expand in Massachusetts.
Something they can expand is that the actual timing of that with the first, I can't believe I'm saying this, the first Trump presidency, and Betsy DeVos, I think it became it became a political, almost litmus test of sorts. And what was a bipartisan idea. I mean, Governor Deval Patrick was at our annual event right before Question 2 came out, right? What was a bipartisan idea very quickly became a partisan one, and that's the world we've been living in for the last 8 years.
But the main criticism you always hear from charter schools is they don't take kids with special needs. They only have the most involved families, that they're taking money away from the public schools. Give us your defense.
I don't really know where to start there. What I would just say is that what we often find in political and education debates is whataboutisms. And what I actually dislike the most, not about criticism of charter schools, but actually criticism of individual district schools that I've worked with. I've worked with 38 or 39 BPS schools over the last 10 years, is that when a school is successful, there's a tendency to marginalize that success. It's like, it's only good because you got that. It's only because you have that. And it gets to your question of like, what do we aspire to?
Right.
And for some reason, we can't accept the fact that there are some schools that are very good at teaching kids, and particularly low-income students of color. And when it happens, we have to somehow make it an exception. Well, there must be something different there. You have different families. You have different rules. Rather than accepting that that's actually possible and should be expected.
Okay, so what should we be doing? What if we do see we have a problem, kids aren't learning, we have 40% of third graders in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. My theory is one of the reasons we have the best school systems in Massachusetts is because we have the smartest, most educated, most affluent parents who are drilling down with their kids at the end of the day. But what should we be doing to try to maybe get more of a middle class in the Boston public schools, so it's not a majority poor system, or in schools like Lawrence, and the state stepped in on Lawrence for a while, that improved, then it didn't improve. We got to do something here. We're falling behind.
Well, and let's just start with the Lawrence example you used. And schools are fragile. They're made up of human beings doing human things, and so it's very typical for schools or school districts to go through periods of progress and periods of decline. That's just kind of normal. I don't think we understand that that's part of the deal, but it is. There's a couple things that Boston should probably do, and some of it they're already doing. Investing significantly more heavily in literacy, particularly evidence-based literacy practices, and ensuring that kids are getting support.
Are they doing that yet? Or are they still with the old, bad, low quality?
So there's been a rollout over the last couple of years of an initiative they call equitable literacy, some of which we've supported, which is to coach and support teachers in implementing curriculum that is evidence-based in literacy. So one of the best bang for your bucks right now is to make sure kids are getting that type of instruction, especially for third grade. In terms of resources, we need a master facilities plan, which will involve closing and consolidating schools, not just to save money, but to actually create the new types of 21st century school spaces and programs we actually need. And then I'd say lastly, we need to have a real commitment, I think, by partners in the city, especially our higher ed partners, to make sure we can reverse this tide of higher education decline. And so actually less kids are entering college in Boston public schools than they were 10 years ago. So actually enrollment in higher ed has declined in the last 10 years, even while high school graduation rates are going up. That's
right.
That's an issue.
And all of that becomes part of this sort of attack on higher education, a dumbing down of society, the spike in illiteracy rates across the country. That's not by accident. So we know that on a particular side of this, if you're too busy worrying about transgender athletes, you won't notice that I'm picking your pocket, kind of thing.
Well, no, and
that's an effective strategy. That's a long-term and effective strategy.
And that's what's to come. I think there's been, because there's something every day. There's the new potential Secretary of Education that Trump will nominate.
From World Wrestling.
Right.
I mean, he definitely has a type. Wealthy, been on TV, lost elections. They all kind of have the same attributes. But what I would say is that I think what most average voters and consumers of news don't know is that the Department of Education in the United States does very little for pre-K through 12.
Right. It's all local. So you can do it locally.
So when Trump says, in caps, send it back to the states, it's already here, right? So almost 70% of the federal budget is for higher ed. It's for higher ed, student aid, it's FAFSA money, Pell Grants, grants to colleges and universities. Where the culture wars are going to happen, where the funding and the carrots and the sticks are going to happen, it's not going to be on pre-K through 12, right? It's going to be in higher ed.
So can you describe this? These things are all connected. Can you summarize this in terms of the local efforts that you've described, sort of melding that into what we do with all of these buildings, these school buildings, which is a really long-term infrastructure plan, and the declining enrollment with the exam schools, the charter schools. I know this is a lot to ask and we have 2 minutes. Can you smush this together in what the bare bones of a plan with different stakeholders would look like?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally the most important thing you do in this process is you have to build first. Right. And so the politics and the trauma of school closures is real. I don't pass over very lightly. It's very dramatic, difficult work. In a world where you want this to work, you have to design new schools folks want to go to and build those buildings and then feed kids into those buildings. That is the very basic one by one we have to do. And you have to do that neighborhood by neighborhood. And it'll take a very long time because we have a lot of school buildings we have to replace. But we have to lead with academic programs in spaces people want, build political consensus, and then fill those buildings.
And make sure people know what's available.
Right, and I think what's happened in the last 5-10 years, whether it's Bill BPS or the Green New Deal for Boston Public Schools, there's been a focus on these closures or marginal things, and they've been difficult to move because there isn't always that value proposition of something people want on the other side.
Okay, this is a lightning round because we do only have a minute left. What do you think about merit pay for teachers so you can get the real geniuses in math and science to come teach school instead of going to work for Elon Musk?
Yeah, the research doesn't say it really works that great. It's more of a gimmick.
Oh, it's more of a gimmick. Okay, that takes care of that. And what do you think about three systems are on strike now, Gloucester, Beverly, and Marblehead, unless they've settled while I've been on the air. Globe said this morning they should raise the fines so it hurts more for teachers to go on strike, and some people think that it's ridiculous that illegal strikes are illegal, that they should be legal. So raise the fines or legal strikes. And/or legal strikes.
All of it doesn't matter because the personal incentives haven't changed. If I'm 60 years old and I live in Beverly and I'm a teacher, if I am willing to take short-term pain, because not only am I going to increase my salary, I'm going to increase my pension by $100,000 to $200,000. And so why wouldn't you strike if you were them?
I haven't thought of that.
It's a really good point.
Yeah.
So the third...
And you've won. They win.
Right.
So there's no reason for them not to.
The third and last one is redefining the definition of the school year and making just a few thoughts on summer school.
Oh, summer school. You wrote a great piece about
non-traditional
summer school.
look at what summer school is and how we should start thinking about our kids' education.
First start by saying that all the work that Boston After School and Beyond has done with Chris Smith is amazing and nation leading, and have Chris come here and answer that question because he's actually the expert. But I think a lot of it comes down to another political issue, which is pilot, which we hear about every year. We hear about these pilot payments that these hospitals and universities are paying.
Yeah.
I'd like them to run our summer programs rather than trying to drag
That's
pennies,
a good idea. Because they're not paying what they should pay.
Rather than dragging pennies out of them every year, why don't we have a bunch of kids just stay in a dorm and run programs for us?
And why does summer school matter so much?
Well, because, first of all, you mentioned it earlier, in our highly educated populace, some kids get more stuff during the summer and they're coming back in September and they've not declined in their skills, they've maybe increased. Whereas a lot of research originally out of Baltimore shows that lower income kids, when they don't have those opportunities in the summer, they actually decline. And to your point, it's a childcare issue now. So even beyond it just being good for academics, it's just an annual I mean, I feel like every January 1st, me and all the Boston parents, everyone's got like 6 laptops open. They've got like 2 phones in front of them, and they're just like on the different lists trying to figure where their kid's going to go. And that's just not any way to deal with it.
And these aren't random musings. This is evidence-based data that says that this works.
Yeah.
100%.
And also because a lot of people cannot afford summer camp.
And the Boston one specifically, I mean, Rand did a study of Boston's after-school and summer programs, particularly summer, and it is 100%, it not only improves kids' academic achievement, but there's evidence their social and emotional skills improve too.
Well, Will Austin, thank you very much.
This was fun.
I'm so glad I was here today.
Bring me back.
I know.
I'm so glad Jim wasn't here. This was fun.
Me too.
Thank
I hope
you.
he's not listening at this particular moment.
We've been speaking with Will Austin. He's the founder and CEO of the Boston Schools Fund. Up next, from the Great British Bake Off to reruns of Julia Child's The French Chef, why do we find cooking, baking shows so calming? And what's your favorite escapist TV? I'm asking for a friend. We'll take your calls and texts next. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the BPL and streaming.
What's going on inside our brains when we have disagreements or tense conversations?
So we have this mixture of anxiety and anger, and over time, that becomes resentment and contempt.
But there are ways to override those reactions. I'm Juana Summers. Catch our series, Seeking Common Ground, on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Today at 4, here on GBH News 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And Mass General Brigham Health Plan with Medicare Advantage plans featuring a new flexible benefits card to cover fitness and weight loss programs, healthcare transportation, and over-the-counter healthcare needs. mgbadvantage.org. And MSI United States, bringing reproductive healthcare and all the opportunity that comes with bodily autonomy.
That actual bloodthirsty competition stuff like Iron Chef or, God forbid, Gordon Ramsay's Hell's Kitchen. We're talking good old-fashioned amateur cooking and baking. The phone and text lines are open at 877-301-8970. Why do we love to watch regular-looking people cook food, especially if it's out in the middle of some green, verdant countryside in Great Britain for the British Baking Show? Is it the accomplishment aspect of it, or do you get to see something complete, created out of nothing but some eggs and spices and other raw ingredients, even if you aren't ever going to do it yourself? Perhaps you find GBH legend Julia Child so soothing, even when she's totally messing up in the kitchen.
I'm going to see if that is flippable. Well, I'm going to try it anyway. When you flip anything, you just have to have the courage of your convictions, particularly if it's sort of a loose mass like this. No, that didn't go very well. See, when I flipped it, I didn't have the courage to do it the way I should have. But you can always pick it up, and if you're alone in the kitchen, who is going to see?
I love it. She flips the thing, it goes to the floor, she picks it up and puts it right back in the pan.
You know what was one of the best things about Julia Child?
What?
Is that even though she was talking to the camera, she always gave the impression that she was just in the kitchen talking to herself.
I know. I bet she spent a lot of time in the kitchen talking to herself, don't you think?
Yeah.
You know, she was one of the best. She revolutionized cooking for all sorts of mothers, including my own, who couldn't do anything but Dinty Moore beef stew until Julia Child came along. But you are the expert here because you are into these cooking shows. I mean, I've watched the British Baking Show a few times, and it is very soothing, and they have lovely pink counters and light
Huge
green
kitchen.
counters.
No,
it's
beautiful.
very pastel.
It's very pastoral setting.
Yes,
Yep.
it is. It's wonderful. And they don't look like they're movie stars. They look like regular people.
They are regular people.
Regular people that, they don't have all this makeup on. They kind of got these, sloppy outfits on. I love that show. But what is the attraction for you?
Well, I've said this on the show many times, I enjoy watching people do things that I myself am really bad at or can't do, especially if they're sort of creative things. I mean, I really don't cook. I'm literally having, several people over for dinner on Saturday. I'm not cooking a thing.
Oh, doing takeout?
No, well, I'm having food prepared and having, by people who know how to prepare food.
Oh, very
bringing
good.
It in.
Good for you.
I'm not making my guests bring like a potluck or anything, but I like watching people put together things that come apart from their imagination and from their skill, but also the sound of the baking shows, whether it's the Great British Baking Show or, Holiday Baking Championship, Halloween Baking Championship. There's a cadence to these shows that is also very soothing. There's a rhythm to it. But these people create some of the most amazing things, and you frequently find folks from Massachusetts. There was a woman named Justine Rhoda who was on the Holiday Baking Championship, I forget what season, but she was fantastic. And there was another guy who teaches.
Oh, is this the place in Hanover that we read about?
No, that's the store itself. And she was quoted because she goes to the store to get some things for cooking. But there was a guy, and I'm sorry I'm blanking on his name. They have so many contestants, but he teaches at North Shore Community College, and he got through most of the competition. He may have been one of the finalists. He was fantastic. Some of the most imaginative and creative people. So it makes you feel good. People are kind to each other on these shows. They help each other, even though it's a competitive show. But they create beautiful things that you can appreciate just because for the sake of themselves, you can appreciate them.
Our number is 877-301-8970, 877-301-8970. Do you find watching these cooking shows, especially the ones that are like the baking shows that are not cutthroat like the Ramsay one, that gives me
Hell's
nervous,
Kitchen,
I have a nervous breakdown watching that. Do you find it particularly soothing in this particular juncture when we are all struggling with politics, no matter what side you're on? Let's start with Jim in Marblehead. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, good afternoon. A long time and very appreciative listener.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you folks are just tremendous, particularly now more than ever, and given our political comment. But my wife and I both are reasonably good home amateur bakers. Cooks, and I'm the baker in the family. And what I enjoy about baking is the precision that it requires. And measure everything in grams, and have to be very careful. And the thing I like about the Great British Baking Show is it is so well done. But what stands out to me above anything else is the civility that is displayed every week.
Yes.
And particularly at the end of the round where, there is someone who is sent home. And often it's a tearful ending. But, the camaraderie among the group, you can't really fake sincerity, as they say. And it comes across as these folks are not only quite talented, but they really enjoy doing what they're doing, and they enjoy the group. So it's beautiful to watch. I find it quite soothing and a wonderful, particularly now, although brief, a wonderful respite from what we're dealing with every day in this political climate.
Couldn't agree with you more, Jim.
That was a lovely call.
It really was.
Thank you very much. A lot of people are saying they're watching things, not necessarily baking shows, but other things to soothe themselves, watching Tubi old movies. Those are the ones that come for free. Somebody else says they're doing Project Runway reruns because I've been binging since the election, watching people create interesting clothing and all kinds of materials as a total escape from the current political dumpster fire. Comfort TV, this other person talks about watching this show about nothing, which of course was Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, etc. Carmen in the car. What do you think, Carmen?
Hello. I'm not much for the banking shows, but I am for escapism, watching reruns of Law and Order. And I think my former colleague, Alejandra Caraballo, can appreciate why I appreciate those shows.
Is this the legendary Carmen Fields?
Well, I don't know about that adjective, but it is Carmen.
Oh, my
Fields.
goodness, Carmen.
It is.
I'm so flattered that
one
you
of the best people on the face of the earth ever. Hi, Carmen.
Yeah, hi, Carmen. Yeah, I love law. You know what's really demented about me? I watch Law and Order SVU, which is terrible. It's
I don't watch that anymore.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
It's about little kids getting hurt. I don't know why I do it. It's kind of sick. But I love the fact that, you have the crime at the beginning, then you go to the commercial, then you have the cops, investigating who might have done the crime. And it's never the first person that they talk to, right? It always segues on to somebody else.
There's a cadence to it.
Yeah,
There's definitely
that's
a script.
Right.
Yeah.
You find out who the person is about, 40 minutes after the hour. Then you have the trial. And they're convicted and they go to jail forever in the lockup out in Colorado where they were in the cell for 23 hours a day.
So what do you like about them, Carmen? What do you like about the reruns?
Well, I don't care for SVU, but I like the original Law and Order because during my days at the DA's office, when that show first started running, and they talk about the relationship between the cops and the prosecutors, that's when the light bulb went off in my head, and it's like, aha, now I understand what I'm doing.
For people who don't know, Carmen was our press person at the Suffolk County DA's office under Ralph Martin, and you couldn't have a better person to work with and keep you calm when there was chaos all around you. But Carmen, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take a little point of privilege while we have you on the phone. Talk about this program about your father. You only have like about 30 seconds or so, but tell us about this program with your father. That's about your father.
You missed it. It was I was on the Culture Show with Jared Bowen on Wednesday or Thursday afternoon, talking about the book that I wrote about my father, the legendary big band leader Ernie Fields.
Oh, I thought you were coming up. I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't realize that. I thought you hadn't been on the show yet. Okay.
No, you missed it. It's online or it's on podcast.
Yep, we can get it online.
The book is available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Carmen, what's it called?
Going Back to T-Town, the Ernie Fields Territory Big Band.
Fantastic.
Absolutely wonderful.
Carmen
Thank you,
Fields,
Carmen.
I'm very flattered.
Opportunity for the plug.
Yes, and very.
You too. Be well.
Yeah, and very, very grateful that you called, Carmen Fields. So, I mean, I get that, the Law and Order rerun, but we have a lot of people.
It gives you security because you know what's going to happen, and people are looking for safety or places
That's right.
they can feel safe.
And they catch the bad guy.
Yes.
But is Ice-T, is he only, I think he's only on the SVU one, isn't Ice-T the only one?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so that's, I get a kick out of
Mariska Hargitay.
Yeah, I get a kick out of her too. Okay. So here's one.
Okay.
I must admit I don't watch straight cooking shows on TV, but I love watching travel shows that focus on food, see how other cultures prepare and present their food. You know, Anthony Bourdain, that's Kevin in New Hampshire. Anthony Bourdain is back on, even though he is no longer with us, obviously.
Yeah.
But I adored his shows. You get great scenery, and you get to listen to him talking up the chef or whoever he's talking to. Oh, somebody else says so many great cooking shows on YouTube from other countries, non-competitive style, just endlessly visually soothing and educational food content. Food Network lost me when they canceled Emerald. Oh, Emerald's from Fall River.
But he's on, I think he has like a Roku channel or something. Another one of our texters says YouTube Chefs is another great option. Jamie Tracy is an amateur chef who has a channel called Anti-Chef, where he's learning to cook by following famous chefs like Julia Child. This texter loves to see people learning and absolutely refusing to give up on their task, despite making sometimes hilariously catastrophic mistakes. There's a suggestion. Here's a plug for, and I like this show too. Since the last round of a horrific election, I've tuned out the news and discovered Only Murders in the Building. What an amazing escape and a joy. That's Cheryl from Boston.
We're talking about how people are flocking to watch TV, things that are on television that are soothing. We're really focusing on baking shows and cooking shows, but lots of people have come with different ideas what to watch. Somebody else says, Jody in Canton, she's been watching Marathon Forensic Files. It's a show about murder, but it's a better alternative to anything about the Orange Man, she says.
I watch murder shows too, and I have watched one or two forensic files.
I like the ones that have the resolution. I don't want to have a bad ending. I want to have the, the crime does not pay, catch the bad person, they go to jail thing. Does Forensic Files have that too?
Well, people do get caught, but it's pretty depressing up until then because they tell you all the terrible things that happened to the murdered person.
Okay.
One of our texters says, I watch Hoarders to make me feel better about my dusty, dog hair-covered home. Well, whatever gets you through.
Walter in Swampscott, thank you for calling.
Hi, Walter.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Just wanted to call in a supportive comment type of thing for the cooking shows. My comment is that when I was in college, senior year, I'd finished all my requirements, and I really had nothing else to take other than the same stuff over again. So I took an independent study of gourmet cooking. And quite frankly, that was the most rewarding class I ever took in college.
There you go. Yes, there you go. Walter, thank you for the call. Very useful in your life.
Now he's a lifetime
post-college.
fan.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So not many people know that Marjorie was actually a contestant on an early season of the Great British Baking Show. Here's a clip of what Paul Hollywood had to say about her lemongrass cookies.
I think the biscuit, it's overbaked. The flavours coming through are not good. It's dry as a bone, it's a bit like sawdust. It's got the texture of hardboard. But besides that, it's all right.
Wait a minute. They're not supposed to be so brutal in the British baking show to say that your cookies taste like sawdust, dry as a bone.
By and large, they're fairly kind in their comments.
Yep.
I mean, for British people, being rude and insulting someone is like the worst thing you can do in life. That's just true of their culture, despite the fact that they have a tendency to colonize anything that isn't nailed down. but they do consider rudeness to be a problem. But every once in a while, someone does bake something that's just so horrific that he doesn't hold back.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Apparently, your lemongrass cookies fell into that category.
My lemongrass cookies were not any good. Listen to this one. I'm obsessed with watching furniture restoration videos on YouTube. It makes no sense, but they are very satisfying and soothing. 877-301-8970 is the number. Kevin in Wakefield, thank you for calling.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
I'm calling from Lakeville, not Wakefield.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no problem. I just wanted to. I heard earlier this week about some people just because of political climate, they don't want to go over to someone's house or whatever because they really don't agree with the politics of this person or that person. However, and when people really put their heart into a nice meal, like everyone gets, a really good turkey or dessert or anything else, people will relax. They will find common ground. And I think it's a good thing because if you're being fed and the conversation is about that, it's not about the rest of this malarkey that's going on, unfortunately, everywhere else in this world.
So, Kevin, are you the chef? Have you done this? Do you do this?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and you have a.
Sure. I love. My favorite holiday is Thanksgiving because it just gets so many people more in a family sort of giving. Whereas Christmas, I think can be about, unfortunately, about this car or this gift or whatever.
Yeah.
I think Thanksgiving is more family focused and it's more about just dealing with people individually. I just think it's a better. I shouldn't say individually. As a community, you're meeting other people that are members of your family and also other people that are in your community. And I think that's a very positive thing.
Kevin, you sound like a very lovely guy.
And it's a really good point that when you are feeding someone or you're just breaking bread with someone, it's such a it's an everyday activity. Everybody's got to eat, but you feel good and you feel more conciliatory about things that you might otherwise object with one another about.
Kevin,
when someone gets in, like sometimes people get into arguments about this and you don't understand why are they coming at it this way? I don't get your point. I don't understand what that's about. But if you enjoy eating a turkey and everyone else likes eating that turkey and everyone is enjoying just the work that went into it, I think that's a better place to start from.
Kevin, thank you very much. That was very uplifting, very nice guy. On the other hand, we have Donna on the road who says she loves watching QVC because it's so funny watching the host go on and on and on about how great a pair of socks are. And Jean from Maynard says she used to love watching Bob Ross painting. He was so soothing. I haven't seen that one
voice,
either.
That's why there are so many parodies of Bob Ross because he was so soothing. He would paint. What did he call them? Happy little. Was it happy little trees or happy little accidents? Happy little accidents.
Happy little accidents. Thank you very much. Somebody else says the British accent is very soothing. That Call the Midwife, that's a show on PBS.
Yeah.
That's
Lots
a very
of people watch
soothing
Call
one.
the Midwife. That has a big following.
Yeah, that has a big following. Ted Lasso on loop. He's another upbeat kind of thing. And we get a lot of comments about Carmen Fields. They love Carmen Fields.
Yeah, the Call with Carmen. One of our texters says the Call with Carmen Fields was great. It lifted me up, and for what it's worth, I'm binging on Law and Order. And the person's second choice is FBI. The third is Hallmark. I have actually heard from a lot of people that they had never watched Hallmark before, and all of a sudden that's the only channel that's on in their house.
Happily Ever After. That's what the Hallmark thing is all about. Happily Ever After. 877-301-8970. Ellen in Westport. Hi.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, how are you two?
Very well, thanks.
Well, I like the cooking shows, but my favorite is, oh, I hear it echo. My favorite is this architecture, an architect from Britain whose name is George Clark. Not only is he really cute, he has several different series. He has one series called Amazing Spaces, where these people develop all types of different, like, office spaces, or they'll take half of a plane or something like that. Then he has another series called from somewhere in the country, or back to the country or something, where people will acquire a space that was once a landmark, like a water tower or an electric pump, and they will make houses out of these things. And he also has another series called From Ugly House to Lovely House, where he has a client who has something wrong with the house that they want to fix up, and he'll hire like an architect from his team. And when he gets finished with these living spaces, you guys would not believe.
Ellen, what's the name of the show? What's the name of the show?
There's 3 different types, but the architecture, you can look it up online.
Okay.
His name is George Clark, with an E.
Thank you.
And he's so cute, you guys.
Hey,
All right,
thank you very
that's
much,
it.
Ellen. That was a great one. I actually named the show because somebody else is texting about House Hunters, Hallmark Christmas. House Hunters is a show about watching home decorating shows.
Right.
And then the Hallmark Christmas movies. Everybody knows about those. Blown Away, a really great show about glass blowing, formulated like the Great British Baking Show competition. That's from Marion.
Well, see, because people are streaming now, they've got their Roku, they've got their Fire Stick, whatever it is. There are whole channels devoted to these things. If you stream stuff on the Roku channel, you've got you could find Honest Renovations, which is Jessica Alba and a friend of hers. Jessica Alba owns the Honest Company, makes all of those products. With it's clean beauty, clean ingredients. She does a house renovation show where she goes in with this longtime friend of hers and they renovate people's houses. But you can sort of curate what you want to watch in ways that you couldn't before. So all of these things people are mentioning, you can literally watch them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if you want to.
I could use some home renovation.
You got to start streaming.
Yeah, I really, things are kind of in a sad state of affairs at my house. Oh, somebody wants to know what vegetables I bake. I bake a lot of vegetables. That's one of my areas of expertise is vegetables. But Valerie says she watches the British Baking Show every night before going to bed. Perfect bedtime story.
It does calm you down. It's like a glass of warm milk. I'm just telling you.
Another GBH hit, All Creatures Great and Small. That's about the vets. This person calls it the ultimate comfort food in these trying times, especially the Christmas episode from season 1.
A good friend of mine loves that show. Jerry from Plymouth recommends The Bear, and I would have to agree. It's an excellent, excellent show.
It's not soothing, though, is it?
No, but it's good drama. Well-written drama also is very satisfying.
Okay.
Where you care about the characters because they're so finely drawn.
Laura has gone back to childhood. She's watching children's programming on GBH, like Arthur and Nature Cat. She's watching all the kids.
Hey, if they started rerunning Zoom from my childhood, I bet you I would start running that.
Let's go to Pam in Stoughton. Hi, Pam.
Well, it's Sutton, but that's okay.
Sorry.
Nowhere near Stoughton. Yeah. But I was calling. I do like the British baking shows, but lately my husband and I, and even when I'm with my sisters, we've been watching the Inspiration Channel. It has the Rifleman, the Gunsmoke, and then on Me TV.
My father loved those shows.
Oh, my God. The Me TV, you have Bonanza, you have MASH, you just have the Waltons. I mean, all day long. So on the day of the election, my sister and I was with her up in Maine. We just put that on because we did not want to know what was going on in the world.
That's a good one, Pam.
Pam, it's really funny. I don't watch that that channel, but you do see like this just a screenshot ad for one of those old westerns that was called Tales of Wells Fargo. Have you seen that? I mean, I've never watched. Oh, we lost Pam. She's off the call. But it's just a really old Western show, and I look at it and think, why would anybody watch Tales of Wells Fargo? One of our other texters, Sarah from West Roxbury, says, if you love cooking shows, you have to check out At Home with Amy Sedaris. Amy Sedaris is David Sedaris' sister. So clearly they have a very funny family. They come from, everybody in the family is pretty funny. She says it's a hilarious send-up of Julia, Martha Stewart, and all other shows of that type.
Well, Sue O'Connell goes on and on about the Martha Stewart special. I'm not sure what station it's on. It's all about her life.
She's got her own channel. She's got a Martha Stewart channel
She has
as
her
well.
own channel.
Oh,
I didn't
yeah,
know
she
had
does.
her own channel.
Totally.
Somebody else says they love Law and Order SVU too because Christopher Maloney is so easy on the eye. That's true. He's kind of a cute guy. There's the sound. There's the sound.
Dunk.
Okay, here is Jared Bowen. Would you like to tell us, Jared Bowen, about any soothing TV that you watch?
I love TV. I have to tell you, it is the one thing I love to do is just sit down and watch television, and it just calms me down. I feel like an hour later, I'm a totally different person.
Anything particular?
Well, I'm always watching something new, so the last couple I've watched are actually tough. It's Penguin, the Penguin on HBO, but it's just what Andrea was just saying. It's so engrossing and so well written, you can totally lose yourself. By the way, Pam from Sutton, I do the same thing, watch the Inspiration Channel. When I go visit my father, he loves to watch all the Bonanzas, the Wells Fargo.
Yep, my father
Tales
did
of
the
Wells
same
Fargo.
thing.
That's a new edition. I know their lineup well enough. I know that's a new edition, but I also love horses, so it's great to watch that. It's just kind of fun. It's so silly.
No, well, you need it. You need it at this particular time. Okay, what's on the show?
So we spent a lot of time with you both earlier talking about Wicked, and we have Gregory Maguire on the show today. He is the writer who started it all in 1995 when he published Wicked. So we'll talk to him about this whole experience of the Wicked verse now with the new movie, and then
You're getting all the big stars, Jared.
Well, we're trying. And then speaking of big stars, Joanne Chang, and speaking of baking,
great.
Joanne Chang is on the show along with David Waters talking about community servings and the great work they do serving food to people in need. And especially around this time of year, they have their great pie bake sale to support their efforts.
She is phenomenal, and Flower Bakery, the stuff that they produce is just she never disappoints. Her bakery never ever disappoints.
It never does, and you can say the same about Joanne and Gregory. I know them both a little bit, and they are both phenomenal human beings. In addition to being extraordinarily successful.
All right, it's
thank
coming
you
up
very
on the
much.
Culture
Sounds
Show.
like a good one. You know, I missed this one earlier, but apparently, according to Dan and Weston, the pièce de résistance on soothing TV is beaver dam removal in Finland, which apparently you can see on YouTube.
What are there beavers?
It's beavers, I guess.
Beavers are removing their own.
What's trend?